Hello and welcome for today's cryptid horror stories. In the comments, where are you from and what kind of cryptids do you like? Now for the stories. The Battle at Black Hollow. Daniel Cray had stopped believing in monsters on his 8th birthday, when his father finally admitted that the scratching in the walls wasn't a boogeyman, just rats. 26 years later, as he stood knee-deep in the snow of Black Hollow, and listened to the screaming that echoed through the frozen trees, Daniel felt the foundations of his rational worldview beginning to crack like lake ice in early spring. The screaming wasn't human. That was the first thing he noticed. It was too high, too sustained, filled with registers that human vocal cords couldn't produce. It rose and fell in patterns that suggested language, or at least intelligence, but it was layered with sounds beneath the surface. Growls, hisses, the cracking of frozen joints. It sounded like an animal in agony, but there was something else too, something that made Daniel's primal hindbrain scream at him to run, to hide, to get as far away from this place as possible. He should have listened to the locals. 3 days ago, when the logging company had assigned him to survey the Black Hollow tract, the foreman at the Adirondack Timber office had warned him. "Place has a reputation," the man had said, not looking up from his paperwork. "Folks don't go there. Hunters that do, they don't come back. Or if they do, they don't come back right." Daniel had laughed it off. He was a professional surveyor, educated at Cornell, trained in forestry and cartography and the rational assessment of wilderness areas. He didn't believe in ghosts, in curses, in the superstitions of backwoods hillbillies who blamed every missing hiker on Wendigos or skinwalkers, or whatever boogeyman they'd invented to explain the harsh realities of life in the northern forest. But that was before his radio died. It had happened at sunset on his second night. He was in his tent, reviewing his notes, when the radio had crackled once and then gone dead. Not just the battery, he had checked that. Something had fried the circuits, melted the wiring, turned the device into a useless lump of plastic and metal, and at the exact moment it died, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds, frosting the inside of his tent with ice crystals. That was when the whispering started. It came from outside, from the darkness beyond the thin nylon walls of his shelter. Voices that sounded like his mother, his father, his ex-wife Sarah, all calling his name with urgent, pleading tones. "Daniel," they whispered. "Daniel, come out. We need you. We're hurt. Help us, Daniel, help us." He knew it was a trick. He knew because his mother was in Florida, his father was dead, and Sarah wouldn't piss on him if he were on fire, let alone come looking for him in the Adirondack wilderness. But knowing didn't stop the voices. They continued for hours, rising and falling, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, sometimes screaming in agony that made Daniel clamp his hands over his ears and rock back and forth like a frightened child. He didn't sleep that night, and when dawn finally came, gray and cold and offering no warmth, he had emerged from his tent to find that something had been inside his camp while he huddled in his sleeping bag. The footprints were everywhere. They weren't human. That much was obvious immediately. The feet that made them had been too large, the toes too long and splayed like a creature that climbed as much as it walked. But they weren't bare prints either, too narrow, too defined, the claw marks at the tips of the toes suggesting something that walked upright on 2 legs rather than 4. The footprints circled his tent. They approached from all directions, converging on his campsite and then retreating back into the forest. Whatever had made them had been studying him, watching him, and had decided, for reasons Daniel couldn't comprehend, not to enter the tent. Not yet. He should have run then. Should have grabbed his pack and his rifle and hiked the 15 miles back to the logging road, radio or no radio. Warnings be damned. But Daniel Cray was a professional, and professionals didn't abandon their assignments because of a few strange tracks. He convinced himself that it was a hoax, a trick by locals to scare off the logging company. He convinced himself that the voices had been hypnagogic hallucinations brought on by stress and sleep deprivation. He convinced himself that the cold snap was just a natural weather pattern, the radio failure just a coincidence. He convinced himself so thoroughly that he spent the entire third day taking measurements, marking boundaries, collecting soil samples as if nothing were wrong. He worked until dusk, when the light failed and the cold drove him back to his tent. He built a fire, cooked his dinner, and prepared for another night in the wilderness. That was when the screaming started. It began as a single voice far in the distance, and Daniel had initially thought it was an animal, a fox perhaps, or a bobcat, something wounded or hunting. But as the minutes passed, the scream grew louder, closer, and he began to realize that it was coming toward him. And it wasn't alone. There were two voices now. One was the high, keening scream he had first heard, filled with pain and hunger. The other was deeper, a bass rumble that shook the snow from the tree branches and vibrated in Daniel's chest. This second voice was answering the first, roaring challenges into the frozen night, and Daniel understood with sudden, terrible clarity that whatever was making these sounds was not just one creature, but two. And they were fighting. The sounds of battle echoed through the hollow. Daniel heard the impact of bodies against trees, the splintering of wood, the wet crunch of flesh being torn. He heard snarls and shrieks and the hissing of breath. He heard something heavy being thrown, something else striking back, and then silence. The silence was worse than the screaming. It was absolute, complete, the silence of a world holding its breath. Daniel stood in the center of his camp, his dinner forgotten, his rifle clutched in trembling hands, and he listened to the silence. Then he heard the footsteps. They were coming from the direction of the battle. Slow, heavy, dragging. Something was moving through the snow, something large and wounded. Daniel could hear the wet sounds of breathing, the crackling of broken branches underfoot, the occasional grunt of pain. He raised his rifle. It was a Remington 700, chambered in .308, capable of taking down a bear. He had thought it would be enough. Now, listening to the thing approach, he wasn't so sure. The footsteps stopped. Daniel waited, his heart hammering, his breath coming in shallow gasps that clouded the air. The fire crackled behind him, casting dancing shadows on the snow. "Help me," a voice whispered. It was human, or at least it sounded human. A man's voice cracked with pain and cold, pleading for assistance. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger. "Who's there?" "Please," the voice said. "I was hunting, something attacked me, I'm hurt, I need help." "Show yourself," Daniel called. "Step into the light." A pause, then movement. A shape emerged from the darkness between two pine trees, shambling forward into the firelight. It was a man, or it had been once. Daniel could see that much. The figure was humanoid, standing upright on two legs, but it was emaciated beyond recognition. Skin stretched tight over bones that seemed too long, too angular, too wrong. The limbs were impossibly elongated, the joints bending in directions that made Daniel's stomach turn. The hands, if they could be called hands, ended in claws that were black and cracked and stained with something that looked like rust but was probably blood. The face was the worst part. It was still vaguely human, but the mouth was too wide, stretching from ear to ear in a grin that exposed teeth that had been filed to points. The eyes were sunken pits of black, no whites visible, and they stared at Daniel with an intensity that was pure hunger. "Wendigo," Daniel whispered, the word escaping before he could stop it. The creature's grin widened. "You know the stories," it hissed, the voice no longer human but something else, something that spoke with the sound of breaking ice and screaming wind. "Good, that will make it sweeter." It lunged. Daniel fired. The shot caught the Wendigo in the shoulder, spinning it around, sending up a spray of black blood that steamed in the cold air. But the creature didn't fall. It didn't even slow down. It turned back to face him, the wound already closing, the skin knitting together with obscene speed. "Bullets cannot kill hunger," the Wendigo whispered, and it came for him again. Daniel fired again and again, emptying the magazine into the creature's chest. Each shot hit home, Each shot tore flesh and each shot was ignored. The Wendigo kept coming, its gait jerky and unnatural, its arms reaching out with claws extended. Daniel turned to run. He made it 3 steps before he felt the impact, felt the claws rake across his back, felt the fire of torn flesh and the wet heat of blood. He went down, face first in the snow, the breath knocked from his lungs. The Wendigo was on him. He could feel its weight, impossibly light for its size, pressing down on him. He could smell it, rotting meat and frost and something else, something ancient and evil. He could feel its breath on his neck, the cold tongue licking at his wound, tasting his blood. "So warm," the Wendigo whispered, "so full of life. I have been so hungry so long, thank you for feeding me." The claws began to dig. They entered Daniel's back at the base of his spine, sliding between vertebrae with surgical precision. The pain was beyond anything he had ever imagined, a white-hot agony that made him scream into the snow. The Wendigo was peeling him open, literally, its claws hooking under skin and pulling backward, separating flesh from muscle in long strips. Daniel screamed until his voice broke, until blood filled his mouth, until consciousness began to fade. He was going to die here, in the snow, eaten alive by something that shouldn't exist. He was going to. The roar shook the forest. It was a sound of fury, of territorial rage, of a predator defending its claim. The Wendigo froze above Daniel, its claws still embedded in his flesh, and it turned its head to look at the source of the sound. Daniel managed to roll over, his vision blurred with pain and blood, and he saw it. It stood at the edge of the clearing, silhouetted against the moon, and it was enormous. 15 feet tall at least, its body covered in matted brown fur that was crusted with old blood and pine sap. The face was ape-like but wrong, the jaw too heavy, the brow too pronounced, the eyes. The eyes were human, or nearly so, filled with intelligence, with calculation, with an awareness that no animal should possess. It was a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, the thing that Daniel had spent his entire adult life dismissing as folklore and hoax, and it was staring at the Wendigo with an expression of pure hatred. The Wendigo hissed, releasing its grip on Daniel. It stood to its full height, all 12 feet of it, and spread its arms wide in a display of aggression. The two creatures faced each other across the clearing, and for a moment there was only the sound of their breathing, the Wendigo's wet and ragged, the Sasquatch's deep and rumbling. Then they charged. The collision was tectonic. The Wendigo and the Sasquatch met in the center of the clearing, and the impact sent shockwaves through the frozen ground. The Wendigo's claws raked across the Sasquatch's chest, opening wounds that spilled dark blood onto the snow. The Sasquatch responded with a backhand blow that caught the Wendigo in the side and sent it flying into a tree. The pine tree snapped. It didn't break, it snapped, the trunk shearing clean through, the top 20 feet crashing down into the snow. The Wendigo lay in the wreckage for a moment, then rose, shaking splinters from its elongated limbs, its mouth opening in a scream of pure rage. "You protect this one," it shrieked at the Sasquatch. "You defend the soft meat." The Sasquatch didn't answer. It couldn't speak, not in words, but its body language was clear enough. It stepped between the Wendigo and Daniel, planting its massive feet in the snow, and raised its arms in challenge. "The forest is mine," the Wendigo said, its voice dropping to a whisper that nonetheless carried across the clearing. "I am the hunger, I am the cold, I am the end of all things. You are just a beast, just an animal. You cannot stop me." It came again, and the battle began in earnest. The Wendigo was fast, unnaturally, impossibly fast. It moved in jerky, stop-motion bursts, covering ground in the blink of an eye, its claws reaching for the Sasquatch's eyes, its teeth snapping at the larger creature's throat. The Sasquatch was slower but stronger, each blow carrying the force of a wrecking ball, each block meeting the Wendigo's strikes with bone-crushing power. They circled each other, trading blows that would have killed any human instantly. The Wendigo slashed the Sasquatch's thigh, opening a wound that poured blood into the snow. The Sasquatch responded by grabbing a fallen branch, a log really thicker than Daniel's waist and 10 feet long, and swinging it like a baseball bat. The log caught the Wendigo in the midsection and lifted it off its feet. The creature flew through the air, trailing black blood, and crashed into a boulder the size of a small car. The rock cracked under the impact, and the Wendigo lay still for a moment, its chest caved in, its ribs protruding through skin. Then the ribs pulled themselves back into place and the Wendigo stood again. "Cannot kill hunger," it whispered, and it laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "Cannot kill what does not live." The Sasquatch roared and charged. This time the two creatures collided and stayed locked together, grappling like wrestlers. The Wendigo's claws dug into the Sasquatch's shoulders, seeking purchase in the thick fur. The Sasquatch's hands wrapped around the Wendigo's neck, thumbs pressing into the creature's throat, trying to crush the life from it. But the Wendigo didn't need to breathe. The pressure on its neck was an inconvenience, nothing more. It brought its knees up, sharp and bony, into the Sasquatch's groin. The Sasquatch grunted in pain but didn't release its grip. The two monsters swayed back and forth, muscles straining, feet digging trenches in the frozen earth. Daniel watched it all from where he lay in the snow, bleeding from the wounds in his back. He knew he should move, should crawl away, should try to escape while the creatures were distracted. But he couldn't. His body wouldn't respond. He could feel blood pooling beneath him, could feel his life draining away with every heartbeat. He was going to die here, that much was certain, but at least he wouldn't die alone. At least he would see how this ended. The Sasquatch gained the advantage. With a roar of effort, it lifted the Wendigo off its feet and slammed it into the ground. The impact cratered the frozen earth, sending up a cloud of snow and ice. The Sasquatch followed up with a stomp, bringing its massive foot down on the Wendigo's chest. The Wendigo's ribcage collapsed. Its sternum caved inward, crushing the heart that technically no longer beat but was still necessary for the creature's animation. The Wendigo screamed, a sound of pure agony, and its claws lashed out, catching the Sasquatch's leg. The Sasquatch stumbled and the Wendigo was on its feet again. It moved like a spider, scuttling across the snow, its broken ribs jutting from its chest like jagged fingers. It leaped, landing on the Sasquatch's back, and its teeth found the larger creature's neck. The Sasquatch roared and bucked, trying to throw the Wendigo off. But the Wendigo held on, its jaw locked, its teeth buried in the Sasquatch's flesh. Blood sprayed, dark and steaming, and the Sasquatch reached back, grabbing the Wendigo by its elongated arm and yanking. The Wendigo's arm came loose with a wet, tearing sound. It didn't detach. The creature was too tough for that. But the shoulder dislocated, the arm hanging at an unnatural angle. The Wendigo shrieked and released its bite, and the Sasquatch threw it away like a rag doll. The Wendigo hit a tree and stuck there, its body impaled on a broken branch that punched through its abdomen and emerged from its back. It hung there, kicking, clawing at the wood, its black blood pouring down the trunk. The Sasquatch approached, limping now, one hand pressed to the wound in its neck. It stood before the impaled Wendigo and raised its massive fists. "Wait," the Wendigo hissed, still grinning despite its wounds. "You think this will kill me? You think this will end me? I am eternal, I am." The Sasquatch punched it. Once, twice, 3 times, each blow crushing bone and driving the Wendigo further onto the impaling branch. The creature's skull cracked under the assault, its face caving inward, its eyes, those terrible black eyes, rupturing and spilling ichor down its cheeks. But still it lived, still it grinned, still it whispered, "You cannot win," it rasped. "I am hunger, I never stop." The Sasquatch grabbed the branch and pulled. The Wendigo came free with a sound like wet fabric tearing, and the Sasquatch threw it to the ground. It placed its foot on the creature's chest again, and this time it began to push. Slowly, inexorably, it pressed down, using its massive weight to crush the Wendigo into the frozen earth. The Wendigo's ribs snapped one by one. its spine compressed, vertebrae grinding against each other, its organs ruptured, black fluid spraying from its mouth and wounds. And still it laughed, still it whispered, still it promised, "I will feed on you." The Sasquatch pushed harder. The ground itself began to give way, the permafrost cracking, the Wendigo sinking into the earth. The creature was being buried alive, pressed into the soil by the Sasquatch's unstoppable weight. Then the ice broke. They had been fighting near the edge of Black Hollow Lake, a frozen body of water that filled the lowest part of the valley. The ice was thick there, thick enough to hold the Sasquatch's weight under normal circumstances. But the battle had weakened it, cracked it, and now the weight of both creatures was too much. The ice gave way with a sound like a gunshot, and both monsters plunged into the freezing water. Daniel watched them disappear beneath the surface. The water churned for a moment, dark shapes moving beneath the ice, and then there was stillness. He lay there in the snow, waiting for them to reappear. Seconds passed, minutes. The cold was seeping into him now, numbing his wounds, stealing his consciousness. He was dying and he knew it, but he had to know, had to see who had won. Then the surface of the lake broke. A hand emerged first. Massive, covered in brown fur, the fingers tipped with blunt nails. It reached up, found the edge of the ice, and pulled. The Sasquatch hauled itself from the water, shuddering, steam rising from its fur in clouds. It dragged itself onto solid ground and collapsed, its chest heaving, blood pooling beneath it from a dozen wounds. Daniel watched it, waiting for the Wendigo to emerge, waiting for the creature to crawl from the lake like it had crawled from the tree, broken but unkillable. But the Wendigo didn't come. The Sasquatch lay still for a long time, breathing hard, its eyes closed. Daniel thought it might be dead, might have succumbed to its wounds and the freezing water. But then the creature moved, shifting its weight, turning its head toward the lake. It watched the water for a while longer, making sure the Wendigo was truly gone. Then, slowly, painfully, it rose to its feet. It was badly wounded. Daniel could see that even from his position on the ground. Its fur was matted with blood, its movements stiff and labored. The wound on its neck was deep, and it was bleeding from a dozen other cuts and gashes. One arm hung at a strange angle, probably broken. But it was alive, and it had won. The Sasquatch turned and looked at Daniel. For a moment, the two of them stared at each other across the clearing, the dying man and the victorious monster. Daniel waited for it to approach, to finish what the Wendigo had started, to consume him as it had consumed its enemy. But the Sasquatch didn't move. It just stood there, watching him with those two human eyes. "Thank you," Daniel whispered, not knowing if the creature could understand, not caring. "Thank you." The Sasquatch tilted its head, as if considering him. Then it turned and walked away, limping into the forest, leaving bloody footprints in the snow. Daniel lay there for a long time, watching the darkness between the trees, waiting for something else to emerge. But nothing did. The forest was quiet, the battle over, the monsters gone. He crawled toward his tent, inch by inch, leaving a trail of blood behind him. He reached the nylon shelter and dragged himself inside, finding his first aid kit, his emergency blanket, his satellite phone, miraculously still working, the Wendigo's curse apparently ended by its defeat. He called for help. He didn't know if anyone would come, didn't know if anyone could find him in time. But he called anyway, whispering his coordinates into the phone, pleading for rescue. Then he lay back and waited. He thought about what he had seen, about the Wendigo with its emaciated form and endless hunger, about the Sasquatch with its strength and its strange, territorial rage, about the battle that had raged in this clearing, the clash of monsters that no human should ever witness. He thought about the way the Sasquatch had looked at him before it left, not with hunger but with something else, recognition perhaps, or maybe just the satisfaction of a job completed. The Sasquatch hadn't saved him, Daniel realized. Not really. It had defended its territory, had driven off a rival predator, and Daniel had simply been collateral damage. If the Sasquatch had arrived a few minutes later, Daniel would be dead. If it had decided to eat him afterward, he would be dead. His survival was an accident, a byproduct of forces he didn't understand and couldn't control. But he was alive, and that was something. He lay there in the tent, shivering, bleeding, waiting for rescue or death, whichever came first. Outside, the forest was silent, the snow falling gently, covering the evidence of the battle. In the morning, there would be nothing to show that two monsters had fought and died here. Nothing but blood on the snow and the body of a man who had seen too much. Daniel closed his eyes and waited for dawn. The helicopter arrived 3 hours after Daniel's call, the thumping of its rotors the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Paramedics bundled him onto a stretcher, IVs in his arms, warming blankets wrapped around his hypothermic body. They asked him questions as they worked. What happened? Who attacked him? Where were the others? And Daniel answered as best he could, though he knew his answers made no sense. "It was an animal," he said, his voice a rasp. "Something in the woods." They didn't push. They had seen his wounds, seen the claw marks that ran the length of his back, seen the strips of flesh that the Wendigo had peeled away from his spine. They knew he was lucky to be alive. They also knew that whatever had done this was still out there. They flew him to the hospital in Saranac Lake, where surgeons spent 6 hours repairing the damage to his back. The Wendigo's claws had severed muscle and fascia, had come within millimeters of his spinal cord. He would have scars for the rest of his life, thick ridges of tissue that would ache in cold weather and remind him of the night he had faced a monster. But he was alive, and more importantly, he was believed. The logging company sent investigators, insurance adjusters, safety officers. They combed the site where Daniel had been attacked and found evidence that confused them. The broken trees, the cratered earth, the blood, so much blood, dark and frozen, too much to have come from one man, and the footprints. "Bear attack," the company spokesman told the press. "Mr. Cray was mauled by a bear. It's a miracle he survived." Daniel didn't argue. He knew what he had seen, knew that no bear had done this. But he also knew that the truth would get him labeled as crazy, as delusional, as a man who had cracked under the pressure of isolation and invented monsters to explain his own incompetence. He signed the non-disclosure agreement. He took the settlement. He promised never to speak of what had happened in Black Hollow, and he tried to forget, but the nightmares wouldn't let him. Every night he saw them. The Wendigo with its eyeless face and endless hunger. The Sasquatch with its strength and its strange, almost human eyes. He saw them fighting, saw them tearing at each other, saw the blood and the violence and the sheer, primal fury of their battle. And he saw something else, something that his waking mind had suppressed but his sleeping mind remembered. He saw the Wendigo rise from the lake. It was 3 weeks after the battle. Daniel was back in his apartment in Albany, trying to resume a normal life when the dreams began to change. Instead of the fight, he saw the aftermath. Saw the Sasquatch limping away into the forest, saw the ice closing over the lake, and saw the Wendigo somehow, impossibly, clawing its way up from the depths. It hadn't drowned. It couldn't drown. The Wendigo was a creature of hunger, not breath, and the freezing water had merely slowed it, trapped it, delayed it. But it was free now, and it was healing. Daniel saw it in his dreams, saw it crawling from the lake on shattered limbs, its bones knitting, its wounds closing, its hunger, always its hunger undiminished. He saw it feeding, saw it consuming the deer and the elk and the smaller creatures of the forest, saw it growing stronger with each meal. He saw it hunting, tracking the Sasquatch through the wilderness, following the trail of blood that the larger creature had left behind. And he saw something else, something worse. The Wendigo was learning, adapting, evolving. It had fought the Sasquatch once and lost, but it wouldn't make the same mistakes again. It was studying its enemy, learning its weaknesses, preparing for the rematch that would come. And when that rematch happened, the Wendigo would be ready. Daniel woke from these dreams screaming, his sheets soaked with sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. He would stumble to the bathroom and splash cold water on his face, staring at his reflection in the mirror, searching for signs of change. Because he was changing, he could feel it. The doctors had told him the Wendigo's claws were filthy, covered in bacteria that had caused a severe infection in his wounds. They had pumped him full of antibiotics, flushed the wounds, packed them with sterile gauze. But something had gotten through, something that the antibiotics couldn't kill. He was hungry all the time now, ravenous. He would eat until his stomach was distended, until he was in physical pain, and still he would want more. He craved meat, raw and bloody, preferred it barely seared, still dripping with juices. He found himself staring at people on the subway, not with attraction or interest, but with something else. Hunger, he was becoming one of them, becoming a Wendigo. The infection was spreading, transforming him, turning him into a creature of endless appetite and bottomless need. He knew what he had to do, knew that if he stayed in civilization, he would become a danger to everyone around him, knew that the only way to stop the transformation was to face the thing that had started it. He had to go back to Black Hollow, had to find the Wendigo, had to end this, one way or another. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He packed a bag, bought a used truck, and drove north into the mountains. The logging road was closed now, the Black Hollow track designated off-limits after the bear attack, but Daniel knew the back ways. He hiked in, carrying supplies, carrying weapons, carrying the knowledge that he was probably walking to his death. But he was already dead. He could feel the Wendigo inside him, growing stronger, consuming his humanity bite by bite. If he didn't end this, he would become the thing he hated. He would become a monster. He reached the hollow at dusk, 3 days after leaving Albany. The clearing was different now. The snow had melted, revealing the scarred earth beneath. The trees were budding, new growth covering the devastation of winter. And in the center of the clearing, near the edge of the lake, something was waiting. It was the Sasquatch. The creature was even larger than Daniel remembered. Or perhaps it was just that Daniel was seeing it clearly for the first time, without the haze of pain and terror. It stood on 2 legs like a man, its body covered in matted brown fur, its face ape-like but expressive. And its eyes, those human eyes, fixed on Daniel with an intensity that made him stop in his tracks. "I know you," Daniel said, his voice barely a whisper. "You saved me." The Sasquatch didn't move. It just stood there watching him. "I'm sick," Daniel continued. "The thing that attacked me, it infected me. I'm turning into one of them. I can feel it." He took a step forward and the Sasquatch tensed, its massive hands clenching into fists. "I need your help," Daniel said. "I need you to tell me how to kill it, how to kill the Wendigo." The Sasquatch tilted its head as if considering. Then it turned and walked into the forest. "Wait," Daniel called, stumbling after it. "Please, I need." The Sasquatch stopped and looked back. For a moment their eyes met and Daniel felt something pass between them, a connection, an understanding. Then the Sasquatch gestured with one massive hand, "Come," and continued into the trees. Daniel followed. They walked for miles, the Sasquatch setting a brutal pace that Daniel struggled to match. They climbed, heading into the higher elevations where the snow still lay thick on the ground. The air grew thinner, colder, and Daniel could feel the Wendigo inside him stirring, growing stronger in the cold. They reached a cave at midnight, the entrance hidden behind a curtain of hanging ice. The Sasquatch pushed through, and Daniel followed, finding himself in a space that was surprisingly warm, heated by some geothermal source deep in the earth. And inside the cave, he found the remains of the Sasquatch's family. They were bones mostly. Old bones, picked clean, arranged in patterns that might have been deliberate or might have been random. But there were also skins, fur pelts stretched and dried, hanging from the cave walls like tapestries. And there were tools, stones shaped into blades, wood carved into spears, evidence of a culture that was more than animal. The Sasquatch were intelligent. Daniel had suspected it, but seeing the evidence drove it home. They had culture, they had family, they had history, and they had been hunted. The Wendigo did this, Daniel said, looking at the bones. Didn't it? The Sasquatch nodded. It was the first time Daniel had seen the creature acknowledge his words, and it startled him. The Sasquatch could understand him, could communicate. It killed your family, Daniel continued. That's why you fight it, not to protect territory, to protect what's left. The Sasquatch nodded again. Then it moved to the back of the cave and returned with something in its hands. It was a skull, but not just any skull. It was the skull of a Wendigo, or what passed for one. The bone was stained black, the jaw cracked and broken, the eye sockets empty. But it was dead, truly dead. Not animated, not hungry, just bone. You killed one, Daniel breathed. Before. The Sasquatch nodded a third time. Then it made a series of gestures, pointing to the skull, then to the lake below, then to Daniel himself. It took Daniel a moment to understand, but when he did, the horror of it struck him like a physical blow. The lake, he whispered. The Wendigo I saw, the one that infected me. You thought you killed it, but you only trapped it, and now it's free. The Sasquatch's eyes grew sad. It gestured again, this time more urgently, pointing to the cave entrance, then to the sky, then to its own chest. It's coming here, Daniel realized. It's tracking you, it's coming to finish what you started. The Sasquatch nodded. Then we have to be ready, Daniel said. We have to end this for good this time. The Sasquatch studied him for a long moment. Then it reached out and touched Daniel's chest, right over his heart. The touch was electric. Daniel felt something surge through him, something warm and ancient and powerful. It was the Sasquatch's essence, its spirit, its life force. And it was doing something to the Wendigo inside him, pushing back the infection, containing the hunger, giving Daniel back control of his own body. Thank you, Daniel whispered. The Sasquatch withdrew its hand. Then it turned and began to prepare for battle. They spent the night in the cave, Daniel resting, the Sasquatch sharpening stone tools and preparing traps. Daniel learned that the creature had a name, or at least, a sound that served as one, a series of grunts and hoots that he couldn't replicate but could recognize. He called the Sasquatch Thorn in his own mind, after the thorn bushes that surrounded the cave entrance. Thorn had fought the Wendigo before, many times. The creatures were eternal, unkillable through normal means, but they could be trapped, delayed, their physical forms destroyed so thoroughly that they took years to reform. The skull in the cave was from a Wendigo that Thorn had killed a century ago, and it had stayed dead because Thorn had destroyed the heart. The heart, Daniel said, as Thorn used gestures to explain. That's the key, we have to destroy the heart. Thorn nodded. He made a gesture of eating, then pointed to the Wendigo's chest. The heart is in the chest, Daniel interpreted, but it's protected. We have to get past the ribs, past the flesh to the core. Thorn made a crushing gesture with his hands. Crush it, Daniel agreed. Burn it, destroy it completely. Thorn nodded. Then he looked up, his head cocked, listening. Daniel heard it too. The wind had changed, carrying a new sound. A whispering, a hissing, the voice of something ancient and hungry. It's here, Daniel whispered. Thorn grabbed his stone club and rose to his feet. He was wounded still, his neck scarred from the last battle, his movements stiff. But there was fire in his eyes, a determination that spoke of vengeance and protection and the primal need to defend what was his. Daniel grabbed his rifle, useless, he knew, but comforting nonetheless, and followed the Sasquatch into the night. The Wendigo was waiting. It stood on the ridge above the cave, silhouetted against the moon, and it was different now. Larger, stronger. The time in the lake had changed it, adapted it, made it more dangerous than before. Its limbs were longer, its claws sharper, its teeth more numerous. And its eyes, those pit-black eyes, were fixed on Daniel with a recognition that made his blood run cold. I know you too, it whispered, its voice carrying across the distance. I tasted you. You are mine now, part of me. Come to me, little morsel. Come and let me finish what I started." "No," Daniel said, raising his rifle. "Not tonight," he fired. The shot echoed across the hollow and the Wendigo laughed. "You still don't understand," it said. "Bullets cannot kill hunger." It leaped. The battle that followed was like nothing Daniel had ever imagined. The Wendigo came at them with a speed that defied physics, covering the distance between them in an eye blink. Thorn met it with a roar, the two creatures colliding in an explosion of fur and bone and black blood. Daniel scrambled back, looking for an angle, looking for a shot. The creatures were moving too fast, grappling, tearing, their bodies a blur of violence. He saw Thorn slam the Wendigo into a tree, saw the tree shatter under the impact. He saw the Wendigo slash Thorn's chest, opening wounds that poured blood onto the snow. He saw Thorn grab the Wendigo's arm and twist, heard the snap of breaking bone, saw the Wendigo's limb hang useless. But the Wendigo didn't slow. It couldn't feel pain, couldn't be weakened by injury. It fought on, using its remaining arm and its teeth and its sheer, unnatural agility. It ducked under Thorn's guard, bit into his thigh, and tore away a mouthful of flesh. Thorn roared and threw the Wendigo away. The creature hit a boulder and bounced, landing on its feet, its broken arm already beginning to heal. "You cannot win," the Wendigo hissed. "I am eternal. I am endless. I am the hunger that never dies." "We'll see about that," Daniel said. He had an idea, a desperate, probably suicidal idea, but it was the only chance they had. "Thorn," he shouted. "The lake, drive it toward the lake." Thorn understood. He roared a challenge and charged the Wendigo, not to kill it, impossible, but to hurt it, to direct it, to push it in the direction Daniel wanted. The Wendigo laughed and met the charge. The two creatures locked together again, but this time Thorn was moving, walking, pushing the Wendigo backward step by step. They were heading downhill, toward the frozen lake below. "Keep going," Daniel shouted, following them. "Almost there." The Wendigo realized what was happening too late. It tried to break free, to disengage, but Thorn had it in a bear hug now, his massive arms locked around the emaciated body. The Sasquatch lifted the Wendigo off its feet and ran, charging toward the lake with the creature struggling in his grip. "No," the Wendigo shrieked. "No, you cannot," Thorn jumped. They hit the ice together, the impact cracking the surface. Thorn rolled, releasing the Wendigo, and scrambled toward the shore. But the Wendigo was faster. It was on its feet instantly, lunging for the Sasquatch. "Thorn!" Daniel screamed. The Wendigo's claws raked across Thorn's back. The Sasquatch stumbled, fell to his knees. The Wendigo was on him, teeth sinking into his shoulder, claws digging into his sides. "No!" Daniel shouted. He ran forward, no plan, no thought, just the need to act. He reached the struggling creatures and threw himself onto the Wendigo's back. The creature was like holding onto a skeleton made of ice. It was cold, so cold, and it writhed beneath him with impossible strength. But Daniel held on, his arms locked around its neck, his weight dragging it back from Thorn. "Get off!" the Wendigo shrieked. "Get off me, you little—" Daniel didn't let go. He squeezed, putting all his strength into the chokehold, feeling the Wendigo's windpipe beneath his forearm. Not that the creature needed to breathe, but it still felt pressure, still felt constriction, and it distracted it. Thorn took advantage of the moment. He reached back, grabbed the Wendigo by its hair, long, stringy stuff that felt like wet straw, and pulled. The Wendigo's head snapped back, its teeth tearing free from Thorn's shoulder, and Daniel felt the moment of opportunity. "Now!" he screamed. "The heart! Get the heart!" Thorn understood. He spun, facing the Wendigo, and brought both his massive fists down on the creature's chest. The impact was like a sledgehammer striking meat. The Wendigo's sternum cracked, its ribs breaking inward, and the creature shrieked with something that sounded almost like fear. "No!" it screamed. "No, you cannot." Thorn struck again, and again. Each blow caved the Wendigo's chest further, crushing bone, pulverizing organs. Daniel could feel the creature weakening beneath him, feel the unnatural vitality fading. The Wendigo was dying, truly dying. After centuries, after millennia, something had found a way to kill it, but it wasn't dead yet. With a surge of desperate strength, the Wendigo threw Daniel off. He hit the ice hard, the breath knocked from his lungs, and he felt the surface crack beneath him. He was lying on the lake, on the frozen water, and the ice was breaking. "Thorn!" he shouted. "The ice! Watch out!" Thorn turned, but too late. The Wendigo, dying but not dead, made one final move. It grabbed the Sasquatch and pulled, using its last strength to drag Thorn toward the center of the lake, toward the thin ice that had broken before. "If I die," the Wendigo hissed, "you die with me." The ice gave way. Both creatures plunged into the freezing water. Daniel saw them go under, saw the dark shapes struggling beneath the surface, saw bubbles rising in a furious stream. Then the water went still. "Thorn!" Daniel screamed, crawling toward the hole. "Thorn!" He reached the edge and looked down. The water was black, bottomless, and he could see nothing. No movement, no sign of either creature. "Thorn!" he shouted again, his voice cracking. "Thorn, come on, come back." Silence. Daniel lay on the ice, staring into the dark water, feeling the cold seep into his bones. He had failed. The Wendigo had won. It had dragged Thorn down with it into the freezing depths where neither could survive. Or could they? The Wendigo didn't need to breathe. And if Thorn could hold his breath long enough. The surface of the lake exploded. A massive form burst upward, water spraying in all directions, and Daniel scrambled back as the Sasquatch hauled himself onto the ice. Thorn was alive. Battered, freezing, blood pouring from a dozen wounds, but alive. And in his hand he held something. It was the Wendigo's heart. It was black, a lump of frozen meat the size of a basketball, still beating with irregular, stuttering pulses. The Wendigo's essence, its power, its immortality. And it was dying. Daniel could see it fading, the beat slowing, the darkness receding. "Crush it," Daniel whispered. "Crush it now." Thorn didn't need to be told twice. He raised the heart over his head and brought it down on the ice with all his strength. The sound was like a thunderclap. The heart shattered, black blood spraying in all directions, and the pieces steamed in the cold air before dissolving into nothing. The Wendigo's remains, its body, its essence, its very soul, evaporated like mist in morning sun. It was over, truly over. The Wendigo was dead. Thorn collapsed onto the ice, his strength finally spent. Daniel crawled to him, checking his wounds, assessing the damage. The Sasquatch was bad. He had lost too much blood, taken too many wounds. Even his legendary resilience might not be enough. "Hold on," Daniel said, pressing his hands against the worst of the wounds. "Hold on, Thorn, we'll get you help." But there was no help coming. They were miles from civilization, and Thorn was too heavy to carry. Daniel could try to go for help, but by the time he returned, the Sasquatch would be dead. "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered, tears freezing on his cheeks. "I'm so sorry." Thorn looked at him. His eyes were dimming, the light fading, but there was still intelligence there, still understanding. He reached up with one massive hand and touched Daniel's face, a gesture of forgiveness, of acceptance. Then his hand fell and his eyes closed. "No," Daniel sobbed. "No, no, no, Thorn, Thorn, please." But the Sasquatch was gone. The battle was won, but the cost was too high. Daniel had lost his friend, his protector, the creature that had saved him twice and given its life to destroy the monster. He sat on the ice, holding Thorn's body, and he wept. Daniel sat with Thorn's body until dawn, holding the cold hand of a creature that had been more human than many humans he had known. When the sun finally rose over Black Hollow, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, he knew he had to move. The cold was already making him sluggish, and if he stayed much longer, he would join Thorn in death. He arranged the Sasquatch's body as best he could, folding the massive limbs into a position of rest, covering the face with his own coat as a makeshift shroud. It wasn't much, but it was all he could do. Thorn deserved a proper burial, a ceremony, a marker, but Daniel couldn't give him that. He could only give him dignity in death and the promise that he would never forget. "Thank you," he whispered, touching the fur one last time, "for everything." Then he turned and walked away, leaving the frozen lake and its terrible memories behind. The hike out took 2 days. Daniel moved slowly, his wounds aching, his body weak from blood loss and exposure. He ate the emergency rations in his pack, drank melted snow, and kept moving. He didn't stop to rest, didn't dare to sleep, because every time he closed his eyes he saw the battle again, saw the Wendigo's face, saw Thorn's eyes closing for the last time. When he finally reached the logging road, he collapsed. A passing Forest Service truck found him 2 hours later, delirious and frostbitten, babbling about monsters and heroes, and the things that lived in the dark places of the forest. They took him to the hospital. They treated his wounds, warmed his body, stabilized his condition. And they called the company, the police, the mental health professionals. Because Daniel Cray was clearly insane, clearly traumatized, clearly suffering from delusions brought on by exposure and isolation. He didn't argue. He told them what they wanted to hear, that he had been attacked by a bear, that he had gotten lost, that his memories of monsters were just dreams. He signed more papers, took more settlements, agreed to more silence. But he didn't forget. In the months that followed, Daniel tried to rebuild his life. He got an apartment in Albany, found work as a consultant, tried to forget the things he had seen. But the memories wouldn't fade. They were burned into his mind, as permanent as the scars on his back. He started researching, reading, learning everything he could about the Wendigo, the Sasquatch, the creatures that lurked at the edges of human knowledge. He found legends, stories, accounts that matched his own experience. He found others who had seen, who knew, who understood. And he found evidence that the Wendigo was not unique. There were others, other Wendigos, other creatures of hunger and cold scattered across the northern forests. They slept for decades, centuries, waking only when the conditions were right, when the winter was harsh enough, when the prey was abundant enough. They were rare, but they were real, and they were dangerous. Daniel knew that killing one Wendigo didn't solve the problem. It just created a vacuum, a space that something else would eventually fill. The forest needed guardians. It needed protectors. It needed someone to stand between the monsters and the world of men. He couldn't be that guardian. He was just a man, scarred and traumatized, with no special powers or abilities. But he could help those who could. He could find them, support them, give them the resources they needed to fight the darkness. He started an organization. Small at first, just a network of contacts, a database of sightings, a fund to support research and protection. He called it the Hollow Watch, after the place where everything had changed. And slowly, over years, it grew. He found others like himself, survivors, people who had faced the darkness and lived, scientists who had studied the impossible, hunters who had tracked the unknowable. They came together, shared their knowledge, pooled their resources. They became a force for good, a light against the shadows. And they discovered that the Wendigo was not the only threat. There were other creatures, other dangers, other things that went bump in the night. Some were benign, simply trying to survive. Others were malevolent, actively hunting humanity. The Sasquatch, Daniel learned, were one of the former, territorial, yes, violent when provoked, but not evil. They were the guardians of the forest, the natural enemies of the Wendigo, the first line of defense against the hunger. But they were dying. Their numbers were dwindling, their territories shrinking, their ancient ways threatened by human expansion. And without them, the Wendigos were growing stronger, waking more often, feeding more freely. The balance was shifting, the war was changing, and humanity was caught in the middle. Daniel spent 5 years building the Hollow Watch. 5 years of research, recruitment, preparation. He never went back to Black Hollow, couldn't bear to see the place where Thorn had died. But he kept the memory alive, kept the fight going, kept searching for ways to protect the world from the things that would devour it. Then, in the winter of his 34th year, he received a message. It came from a remote village in northern Canada, a place so small it didn't appear on most maps. The message was simple, transmitted by satellite phone, written in the broken English of someone for whom it was a third or fourth language. "They are waking. The hunger returns. We need help." Daniel knew what it meant. Another Wendigo, maybe more than one, and this time there was no Sasquatch to stand against it. He gathered his team, 5 of them, the best he had, hunters and trackers and scientists who had faced the darkness before. They flew north, deep into the Canadian wilderness, to a place where the winter never truly ended. The village was called Tukto, population 43. When they arrived, the population was 37. 6 people were missing, taken in the night, dragged from their homes, their beds soaked with blood but their bodies gone. The survivors were terrified, speaking of whispers in the dark, of voices that called their names, of something that moved through the snow without leaving tracks. "It came from the north," the village elder told Daniel, an Inuit woman named Anna who had lived through 60 winters. "From the ice. It has been sleeping there for a long time, longer than my grandmother's grandmother, but now it wakes, and it is hungry." "How long?" Daniel asked. 3 days, it takes one each night. Tonight will be the 4th. "Then we have until nightfall," Daniel said. "We need to prepare." They set traps, bear traps, pit traps, snares. They poured gasoline in a perimeter around the village, ready to ignite if the creature approached. They distributed weapons, high-powered rifles, shotguns, knives, and instructed the villagers to stay inside, to lock their doors, to ignore any voices they heard. It wasn't enough. Daniel knew it wasn't enough, but it was all they could do. Night fell, the temperature plummeted, the wind picked up carrying the promise of snow, and from the north, from the direction of the frozen sea, came the whispering. "Anna," the voice called. "Anna, come out. Your husband is here. He needs you." The elder sat in her cabin, hands clasped, eyes closed, refusing to listen. Outside, Daniel and his team waited in the darkness, weapons ready, hearts hammering. "I know you can hear me," the voice continued. "I know you are afraid. Don't be afraid, grandmother. I only want to talk. I only want to share my hunger." It was different from the Wendigo Daniel had faced. That one had been animalistic, driven by pure instinct. This one was intelligent, manipulative, almost charming in its cruelty. It knew their names, their fears, their weaknesses. It had been watching, learning, preparing. "Daniel," the voice called, shifting, changing. "Daniel Cray, I know you too. I know what you did. I know you killed my brother." Daniel froze. "My brother." The Wendigo was connected, part of a network, a family of hunger that spanned the frozen north. "He was weak," the voice continued. "A young one, barely a century old. You did me a favor killing him. Now I can claim his territory, his hunting grounds, his inheritance." "Show yourself," Daniel shouted into the dark. "Face us." Laughter, cold and dry and filled with broken glass. "Oh, Daniel, you think I am alone. You think I am the only one who has come to this feast." The snow around the village erupted. Shapes rose from the drifts, from the shadows, from the very air itself. Wendigos. Not one, but 3. The speaker, the leader, and 2 others, younger, smaller, but no less deadly. "My children," the voice said, and the largest of the Wendigos stepped into the light of the moon. It was massive, twice the size of the one Daniel had fought before, its body bloated with centuries of feeding. Its eyes were not black pits but glowing embers, burning with cold fire. "Meet Daniel Cray, the one who killed your uncle." "Uncle," one of the smaller Wendigos hissed. "He was weak. He deserved to die." "Agreed," the leader said, "but the insult remains. Daniel Cray killed one of us. That cannot go unanswered." "Then answer it," Daniel said, raising his rifle. "Come and get me." The Wendigos attacked. The battle was chaos. Daniel fired, his shot catching the largest Wendigo in the chest, but the creature didn't even flinch. It kept coming, its massive form moving with terrible speed, its claws reaching for Daniel's throat. Daniel dodged, rolling in the snow, coming up with his knife in hand. He stabbed at the Wendigo's leg, felt the blade bite, felt the cold flesh part. Black blood sprayed, freezing instantly on his hand, and the Wendigo shrieked. But it didn't stop. It kicked, catching Daniel in the chest, sending him flying into a snowbank. He hit hard, the breath knocked from his lungs, and he lay there gasping as the Wendigo loomed over him. "You fought one of us before," the creature said. "You learned our weakness, the heart. Crush the heart, kill the Wendigo, but I am not my brother. I am older, stronger. My heart is not so easily reached." It reached down, grabbed Daniel by the throat, and lifted him into the air. Daniel kicked, struggled, tried to break free, but the Wendigo's grip was iron. He felt his airway closing, felt his vision beginning to fade, felt the cold of the creature's touch seeping into his very soul. "I will eat you slowly," the Wendigo whispered, "piece by piece. While you still live, you will feel every bite, every swallow, every—" The roar split the night. It was different from the Wendigo's voice. Deeper, older, filled with a fury that was righteous rather than hungry, and it was familiar. Daniel turned his head, his vision swimming, and he saw them emerging from the forest. Dozens of them. Massive forms covered in brown fur, their eyes reflecting the moonlight, their massive fists raised in challenge. Sasquatch, an entire tribe of them. They had come. Thorn's people, his family, his kind. They had heard the call, smelled the Wendigo's presence, and they had come to fight. The Wendigo dropped Daniel and turned to face the new threat. "No," it hissed. "No, you were gone, your kind was broken, scattered." The largest of the Sasquatch stepped forward. It was bigger than Thorn had been, older, its fur streaked with gray. And in its eyes, Daniel saw intelligence, calculation, and a hatred that had been burning for millennia. "We are the forest's wrath," the Sasquatch said, and its voice was like stones grinding together, like avalanches falling, like the earth itself speaking. "You are the forest's shame, and tonight we end you." The battle that followed was unlike anything Daniel had ever witnessed. It was war on a scale that defied comprehension, a clash of titans that shook the very foundations of the world. The Sasquatch charged, 40 of them, a wall of fur and muscle and righteous fury. The Wendigos met them, the three creatures moving in perfect coordination, their claws and teeth flashing in the moonlight. The first Sasquatch fell within seconds. A young male, barely full-grown, caught by the lead Wendigo's claws and disemboweled. His entrails steamed in the cold air as he collapsed, his screams cutting off in a wet gurgle. The Wendigo didn't even pause. It stepped over the body and moved to the next, its teeth finding a throat, its hands tearing at fur and flesh. But the Sasquatch were not defenseless. They fought back with stone clubs and spears, with fists that could shatter bone, with strategies that spoke of intelligence and planning. They surrounded the Wendigos, attacked from all sides, never letting the creatures focus on a single target. Daniel scrambled to his feet, grabbing his rifle, looking for a shot. But there was no clear target, no safe angle. The combatants were too close, too intertwined, a mass of writhing bodies that moved too fast to track. He saw an opening, saw one of the younger Wendigos separated from the pack, and he took the shot. The .308 round caught the creature in the back of the head, blowing out its face in a spray of black blood and bone. The Wendigo staggered, fell to its knees, and the Sasquatch nearest to it brought a stone club down on its skull. Once, twice, 3 times. The Wendigo's head caved in, its body convulsing, and then it was still. "The heart!" Daniel screamed. "Crush the heart!" The Sasquatch understood. It dropped its club, grabbed the Wendigo's chest, and tore. The ribcage came apart like rotted wood, and the Sasquatch reached inside, pulled out the black, beating heart, and crushed it in its fist. The Wendigo dissolved, turned to mist, vanished into the night. But there were still two more, and the elder Wendigo was furious. "You dare!" it shrieked, its voice shattering windows, cracking ice, making the earth itself shake. "You dare to kill my child! You will suffer for this, all of you!" It moved faster than before, becoming a blur of claws and teeth in screaming fury. Sasquatch fell before it, their bodies torn apart, their blood painting the snow in dark patterns. The creature was a whirlwind of death, unstoppable, unkillable, and it was winning. The Sasquatch leader roared a command, and his people retreated, reforming their lines, preparing for another charge. But Daniel could see the fear in their eyes. They had never faced a Wendigo this old, this strong. They were losing. Then he remembered the heart. The Wendigo had said its heart wasn't easy to reach, but it still had one, and if he could find it, crush it. He moved. While the Wendigo was focused on the Sasquatch, while it was distracted by its own rage, Daniel ran. He circled around, using the chaos as cover, getting behind the creature. The Wendigo's back was exposed, the emaciated spine visible through tattered skin. But the heart wasn't there. Daniel knew anatomy. The heart should be in the chest, protected by the ribs. But the Wendigo's chest was concave, the ribs protruding, and there was no space for a heart. Unless... Daniel looked down. The Wendigo's abdomen was distended, bloated, swollen with something. With centuries of feeding, yes, but also with something else. It had moved its heart, hidden it, protected it where no one would think to look. "You're clever," the Wendigo said, and Daniel realized too late that the creature had known he was there all along. But not clever enough. The Wendigo spun, its arm lashing out, and caught Daniel in the side. He felt ribs break, felt something inside him tear, felt himself lifted off his feet and thrown through the air. He hit the side of a cabin hard enough to crack the logs. He slid down, leaving a trail of blood, and lay in the snow, unable to move, unable to breathe. The Wendigo approached, its ember eyes burning with triumph. "I will eat you last," it promised. "I will make you watch as I consume your friends, as I destroy the last of the Sasquatch. And then when you are broken, when you have nothing left, I will take my time with you. I will make you beg for death." "No," Daniel whispered. He reached into his coat, his hand finding the object he had carried with him every day for 5 years. The Thunderstone, the one he had pulled from the ice after Thorn's death, the one that hummed with power. He didn't know what it would do, didn't know if it would help or hurt, but he had to try. He pulled it out and smashed it against the cabin wall. The explosion was blinding, light and sound and pressure that seemed to fold reality itself. Daniel felt himself being lifted, felt the air burning around him, felt the Wendigo's scream of agony mixing with his own. When the light faded, when he could see again, the Wendigo was gone. Not dead, he could feel it still somewhere, retreating, fleeing, but injured, weakened, driven back. And in the center of the crater where the cabin had been, surrounded by the bodies of the fallen, stood the Sasquatch leader. He was wounded, badly. Blood poured from a dozen wounds, fur matted with gore, but he was alive, and he was looking at Daniel with something like respect. "You are brave," the Sasquatch said, his voice like grinding stones, "for a human." "I'm dying," Daniel whispered. "Yes," the Sasquatch agreed, "but not yet, not tonight." He knelt beside Daniel, placed one massive hand on his chest, and pushed. Energy surged through Daniel's body. Not enough to heal him. He could feel the damage, the broken ribs, the torn organs, the blood filling his lungs, but enough to keep him alive, enough to give him time. "Why?" Daniel asked. "Because you fought for us," the Sasquatch said. "Because you honored Thorn's memory. Because the forest needs humans who understand, who remember, who will stand with us when the darkness comes." "I can't," Daniel whispered. "I'm not strong enough." "You are stronger than you know," the Sasquatch said. "Rest now, Daniel Cray, heal, and when you are ready, find us again. The war is not over. The Wendigos will return, and when they do, we will need you." Daniel felt his eyes closing, felt the darkness taking him. But it was a gentle darkness, a healing darkness, not the final night of death. "What's your name?" he whispered. "Stone," the Sasquatch said. "I am Stone, and I am your friend." Then Daniel slept. When he woke, he was in a hospital in Yellowknife, tubes in his arms, machines beeping around him. The doctors told him he had been found 3 days ago, near the ruins of Tukto, barely alive. They told him the village had been destroyed, the inhabitants evacuated, the cause listed as gas explosion. They told him he was lucky to be alive, that he shouldn't have survived, that he was a medical miracle. Daniel didn't tell them about the Wendigos, didn't tell them about the Sasquatch, didn't tell them about the war that raged in the frozen north while humanity slept in ignorance. He just nodded, accepted their diagnosis, and began the long process of healing. But he knew that one day he would be called again, that the darkness would rise and he would have to face it. And when that day came, he would be ready, because he was Daniel Cray, survivor of Black Hollow, friend of the Sasquatch, enemy of the Wendigo, and he was not afraid. Daniel spent 6 months in recovery. 6 months of surgeries, of physical therapy, of learning to walk again after the Wendigo's claws had shattered his hip. 6 months of nightmares, of waking up screaming, of feeling the hunger that still lingered in his blood. But he also spent those months preparing. While his body healed, his mind worked, planning, strategizing, learning everything he could about the creatures he had sworn to fight. He discovered that the Wendigos were not truly immortal. They could be killed permanently, but it required destroying not just the heart but the essence. The black blood that ran through their veins was their true form, their true nature. Destroy the blood, scatter it so thoroughly that it could never reform, and the Wendigo would die. He also discovered that they had a weakness to heat, not just fire but intense, sustained heat. The kind that could be generated by military-grade incendiary weapons. The kind that turned flesh to ash, bone to dust, blood to vapor. He filed his reports with the Hollow Watch. He trained new recruits, teaching them what he knew, preparing them for the battles to come. He rebuilt the network, expanded it, created cells across the northern forests where the Wendigos slept, and he waited for the call. It came on a Tuesday in October, 5 years after the battle at Tukto. A message from Stone, transmitted through the old channels, the ones the Sasquatch used. "It has returned. The elder Wendigo, it has healed. It is hunting. Meet me at Black Hollow. The final battle begins." Daniel didn't hesitate. He gathered his team, 12 now, the best of the Hollow Watch, and they flew to the Adirondacks. They landed at the old logging strip, hiked the 15 miles to Black Hollow, and set up camp where Daniel's tent had once stood. Stone was waiting for them, not alone. He had brought an army. Sasquatch filled the forest, dozens of them from all the tribes of the north. They had answered the call, gathered for this final confrontation, because Stone had learned something that changed everything. The Wendigo elder had found a way to reproduce. Not by infection, not by transformation, but by division. It had learned to split itself, to create copies, to build an army of its own. There were dozens of Wendigos now, scattered across the north, all controlled by the elder's mind. "If we kill the elder," Stone explained, "the others will fall. They are extensions of its will. Without it, they are just meat." "Then we kill the elder," Daniel said. "It knows we are coming," Stone warned. "It has prepared. It has gathered its children, its copies, its army of hunger. This will not be like before. This will be war." "Then we fight a war," Daniel said, "and we win." They prepared through the night. Daniel distributed weapons, flamethrowers, incendiary grenades, thermite charges. The Sasquatch sharpened stone weapons, prepared traps, painted themselves with mud and ash for war. At dawn they marched. The Wendigo army was waiting in the frozen lake. They had made it their fortress, their stronghold, their place of power. Dozens of them standing on the ice, their emaciated forms a wall of hunger and cold. And in the center the elder, larger than before, bloated with power, its ember eyes burning with ancient malice. "You come to die," it called out, its voice carrying across the hollow. "All of you, Sasquatch and human alike, you will feed me. You will feed my children, and then when you are gone, we will feast on your world." "No," Stone roared, and he charged. The battle was like nothing the world had ever seen. Sasquatch and Wendigo colliding in waves of violence that shook the earth. The frozen lake cracked under the weight of their struggle, the ice breaking, sending combatants plunging into the frigid water. Daniel fought at Stone's side, his flamethrower spilling liquid fire across the Wendigo ranks. The creatures screamed, their flesh burning, their black blood boiling. But they kept coming, kept fighting, their numbers seemingly endless. One of Daniel's team fell, Sarah, a former Marine who had joined the watch 2 years ago. A Wendigo caught her, its claws raking across her chest, and she went down screaming. Daniel saw it happen, saw the creature begin to feed, and he turned his flamethrower on them both. Sarah burned. The Wendigo burned, and when the fire cleared, there was nothing left but ash. "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered, tears freezing on his face. "I'm so sorry." But there was no time for grief. The battle raged on, and the elder Wendigo had yet to enter the fray. It waited, watching, letting its children die. It was conserving its strength, waiting for the right moment. And when that moment came, it struck. Stone was fighting 3 Wendigos at once, his stone club crushing skulls, his fists shattering bone. He didn't see the elder coming. None of them did. The elder Wendigo struck like lightning, its claws finding Stone's back, its teeth sinking into his neck. The Sasquatch leader roared, trying to throw the creature off, but the elder held on, riding him like a bull, its claws digging deeper, seeking the heart. "Stone!" Daniel screamed. He ran, firing his pistol, but the bullets had no effect. The elder Wendigo ignored him, focused on its prey, its ember eyes burning with triumph. "The forest's wrath," it hissed, "ends here." Its claws found Stone's heart. "No," Daniel screamed. He was too far away, too slow, too weak. He watched as the Wendigo tore the heart from Stone's chest, watched as the light faded from the Sasquatch leader's eyes, watched as his friend fell. "No," Daniel whispered, falling to his knees. "No, no, no." The Wendigo elder stood over Stone's body, holding the heart in its claws, and it laughed. "Your champion is dead," it called out, its voice carrying across the battlefield. "Your hope is gone. Now you will all." Daniel didn't hear the rest. He was moving, running, his mind blank with grief and rage. He had one weapon left, one chance, one hope. He pulled the thermite charge from his pack. The Wendigo saw him coming, saw the device in his hands, and its eyes widened. It recognized the threat. It tried to move, tried to dodge, but Daniel was already there. "For Thorn," Daniel whispered, "for Stone, for everyone." He shoved the charge into the Wendigo's open mouth and triggered the detonator. The explosion was a sun, a miniature star burning at the heart of the frozen lake. The Wendigo elder's head vaporized instantly, its body following, its black blood flash boiling into steam, and the shockwave spread. Every Wendigo on the battlefield convulsed as their connection to the elder was severed. They screamed, their voices merging into a single wail of agony and loss. And then, one by one, they fell. Their bodies dissolved, turned to mist, blew away on the wind. The battle was over. The war was won. But the cost was staggering. Daniel lay on the ice, his body broken, his vision fading. He could feel the cold seeping in, feel his life draining away. Around him, the survivors were gathering, Sasquatch and human alike, tending to the wounded, mourning the dead. Stone's body lay nearby, his heart restored to his chest by one of his people, but the light was gone from his eyes. The great leader was dead. "Daniel." He turned his head, his last strength fading, and saw a Sasquatch kneeling beside him. A young one, barely grown, with eyes that reminded him of Thorn. "You saved us," the young Sasquatch said. "You killed the elder, you ended the threat." "For now," Daniel whispered. There will be others, there are always others. Then we will fight them, the young one said, together as you fought with us. I'm dying, Daniel said. No, the Sasquatch said. Not yet, you have earned your rest, Daniel Cray, but not today. He placed his hand on Daniel's chest and energy surged through him. Not enough to heal him completely, the damage was too severe, but enough to keep him alive, enough to give him time. Who are you? Daniel asked. I am River, the Sasquatch said, son of stone, and I am your friend. Daniel smiled. River, he repeated, I like that. Rest now, River said. We will take you home. Daniel closed his eyes and let the darkness take him, not the final darkness of death, but the healing darkness of sleep. When he woke, he was in a hospital again, but this time he wasn't alone. Sitting beside his bed was River in a disguise of hat and coat, looking more human than Sasquatch. You came, Daniel said. We are friends, River said. Friends visit. The others? Safe, the Wendigos are gone for now, but we will be ready when they return. Good, Daniel said. That's good. He looked at the Sasquatch, at this creature that was both monster and friend, both animal and person. He thought about the world he lived in now, a world where legends were real, where monsters walked, where the darkness was real and needed to be fought. He thought about Thorn, about Stone, about all the friends he had lost. And he thought about River, about the future, about the battles yet to come. I'm getting old, Daniel said. You are, River agreed, too old for this. Perhaps, but you are also too stubborn to stop. Daniel laughed, then winced as the motion pulled at his wounds. True, very true. Rest, River said, heal, and when you are ready, come find us. The forest always needs guardians, and you, Daniel Cray, are one of the best. I'll be there, Daniel promised, as soon as I can walk. Good, River said, standing. Until then. He turned and walked away, his massive form disappearing through the door, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. The battle was over. The Wendigo elder was dead. But the war would continue as it had for millennia, as it would for millennia more. The darkness would always rise, always hunger, always seek to consume. But as long as there were those willing to fight it, willing to stand against the shadows, the light would endure. Daniel Cray closed his eyes and slept, dreaming of forests and friends and the battles yet to come. He would be ready. When the Wendigos rose again, when the hunger returned, he would be there. With stone and fire and the strength of those who refused to surrender, he was the guardian of Black Hollow. 5 years after the Battle of Black Hollow, Daniel Cray stood at the edge of the frozen lake and watched the sun rise over the mountains. He was 53 years old now, his hair gray, his body scarred, his walk slowed by the injuries he had sustained in a lifetime of fighting monsters. But he was alive, and the Hollow Watch was thriving. Under his leadership, the organization had grown from a small network of survivors to an international force. They had cells in Canada, Alaska, Scandinavia, Russia, anywhere the Wendigos slept. The Hollow Watch stood ready. They had developed new weapons, new tactics, new ways of tracking and killing the creatures of hunger. And they had allies. The Sasquatch tribes, led now by River, had become partners in the fight. Together, human and Sasquatch patrolled the forests, watching for signs of Wendigo activity, ready to respond at a moment's notice. The war was not over. It would never be over. But for the first time in centuries, maybe millennia, the balance had shifted. The Wendigos were no longer the apex predators of the frozen north. They were hunted now, feared, their numbers dwindling as the Hollow Watch found their nests and destroyed them before they could wake. Daniel was proud of what they had built, proud of the lives they had saved, the monsters they had killed, the world they had protected. But he was tired, so very tired. He walked to the spot where Thorn had fallen, where Stone had died, where so many friends had given their lives. There was a marker there now, a simple stone carved with symbols that meant guardian in the Sasquatch language. Daniel knelt and placed a flower on the stone. "I miss you, my friends," he whispered, "every day." The wind answered, carrying the scent of pine and snow and distant wood smoke. And in the whisper of the trees, Daniel thought he could hear their voices, their laughter, their encouragement. "Keep fighting, keep guarding, keep the light burning." "I will," Daniel promised, "until my last breath." He rose, his old bones creaking, and turned to face the forest. River was waiting for him, as he always was, his massive form a comforting presence in the shadow of the trees. "Ready?" the Sasquatch asked. "Ready," Daniel said. They walked together into the woods, two guardians, two friends, two warriors in an eternal war. The sun rose higher, warming the frozen earth, and the darkness retreated before the light. For now the world was safe. And as long as there were those willing to fight, it always would be. The legend of Black Hollow would endure. The story of the battle between Wendigo and Sasquatch would be told and retold, growing in the telling, becoming myth and memory. But those who had been there would never forget. They would remember the blood and the pain and the courage. They would remember the friends they had lost and the monsters they had killed. And they would remember Daniel Cray, the man who had faced the darkness and won. The guardian of the hollow. The enemy of hunger. The friend of monsters. His story was not over. There would be more battles, more monsters, more darkness to face, but he was ready. He was Daniel Cray. And he was not afraid. The Weeping Dark. The Poconos had never looked so alive, so violently green, so aggressively verdant. The spring rains had come early and stayed late, turning the Pennsylvania forest into a jungle of moss and fern and dripping hemlock. The air itself seemed liquid, saturated with moisture that clung to the skin and filled the lungs with the scent of rot and renewal. It was perfect hunting weather, or so the 6 men gathered at the trailhead believed. They were trophy hunters, weekend warriors who spent their weekdays in office buildings and their weekends in the wilderness, seeking validation through the destruction of beautiful things. They had permits for black bear, though the season was months away, and they carried rifles that cost more than most cars, scopes that could spot a deer at 500 yards, camo gear that had never seen a moment of genuine danger. Their leader was Richard "Dick" Halloway, a Philadelphia investment banker who had discovered hunting 5 years ago and approached it with the same obsessive intensity he applied to leveraged buyouts. He was 53, balding, carrying 20 extra pounds that his expensive gear couldn't quite conceal, and he had never killed anything larger than a turkey. But he talked about hunting with the authority of a man who had faced death in the wilderness, who understood the primal dance between predator and prey. "The trick is patience," he told his companions as they checked their equipment, his voice carrying the condescension of a man explaining simple concepts to children. "You wait, you watch, you become part of the forest, the animals will come to you." His companions nodded, deferential. There was Marcus Chen, a tech entrepreneur who had funded the trip in exchange for an invitation. The Wilcox brothers, Tim and Tom, who ran a chain of auto dealerships and had been Dick's college fraternity brothers. Vincent "Vinny" Rossi, a construction contractor who fancied himself a man's man and carried a bow despite having never successfully hit a target. And Paul Abernathy, the youngest at 32, who had been invited at the last minute when another hunter dropped out. Paul didn't want to be there. He had accepted the invitation out of guilt, out of obligation, out of the same desperate need for male approval that had driven him to join the fraternity 15 years ago. He didn't like hunting, didn't understand the appeal of killing for sport, but he was trapped now, committed, unable to back out without appearing weak. They set out at dawn, their boots squelching on the muddy trail, their expensive gear already getting soaked in the wet. The forest closed around them like a fist, the hemlock canopy blocking out the sky, the undergrowth reducing visibility to 20 feet in any direction. It was claustrophobic, oppressive, a green hell that seemed to resent their intrusion. Dick led the way, following a game trail that was barely visible beneath the ferns. He walked with confidence, though he had never been here before, though he had no guide, though he was navigating by GPS and arrogance. The others followed, struggling to keep up, their boots sinking in mud that seemed to pull at their feet with every step. It was Paul who saw them first, the tracks in the soft earth beside the trail. He stopped, staring down at the ground, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were showing him. "What is it?" Marcus asked, noticing his pause. "You see something." Paul didn't answer. He was looking at footprints, but they were wrong, all wrong. They were shaped like human feet, 5 toes splayed wide, but they were too large, too long, and they seemed to have been made by something that weighed far more than any human. The prints were sunk deep in the mud, as if whatever made them had stepped here with tremendous weight, and they were filled with liquid. Not water, something else. Something that bubbled and steamed and smelled like vinegar mixed with copper. "Guys," Paul managed, his voice barely above a whisper, "you need to see this." They gathered around, staring down at the tracks. Dick made a dismissive sound, a snort of superiority. "Bigfoot hoax," he said. "Local kids messing with tourists." "Then where are the boot prints?" Paul asked. "Someone made these, they'd leave their own tracks getting here, but there's nothing, just these." Dick opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. He was right. The tracks appeared out of nowhere, materialized in the middle of the trail, with no sign of approach or departure. It was as if whatever made them had dropped from the sky, stepped here, and vanished. "Weird," Vinny said, kneeling to get a closer look. "What is that stuff?" He reached out to touch the liquid filling the prints. Paul grabbed his wrist, stopping him. "Don't," he said, his voice urgent. "Look at it, really look." They looked and they saw. The liquid was weeping. It was bubbling up from the ground, filling the prints from below, though the earth was firm and showed no sign of springs or seeps. And it was viscous, thick, more like syrup than water, with a pale yellow color that reminded Paul of infected pus. "That's disgusting," Tom Wilcox said, taking a step back. "Let's get out of here." But Dick was fascinated, his hunter's instinct warring with his disgust. "Something made these," he said. "Something big. We should follow them, see what we find." "Are you crazy?" Paul asked. "Did you see that liquid? Something is wrong here. We need to go back." "Go back," Dick laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "We've been walking for an hour. You want to waste all that effort because you got spooked by some weird mud." "It's not mud," Paul insisted. "Look at it, it's still coming, it's still bubbling up. That's not natural." "Nothing in this forest is natural," Dick countered. "That's the point. We're here to hunt the unnatural, the wild, the untamed. You want to go back, go back. The rest of us are following these tracks." He set off along the trail, following the footprints that appeared every 10 feet or so, each one weeping that viscous yellow fluid. The others followed, caught up in the momentum of the group, unwilling to be the one who turned back, who showed fear, who admitted weakness. Paul hesitated. He wanted to leave, to turn around, to run back to the trailhead and drive away and never look back. But he couldn't. The fraternity code, the male bond, the unspoken rules that governed their behavior demanded that he stay, that he face his fear, that he prove his courage. He followed. The footprints led deeper into the forest, the terrain growing steeper, the undergrowth thicker, the air more oppressive. The hemlock gave way to spruce, the ferns to blackberry brambles that tore at their clothing with thorns like fishhooks. They were off the trail now, bushwhacking through terrain that no sane hunter would attempt, following tracks that seemed to lead nowhere. Paul tried to mark their path, breaking branches, stacking stones, anything that might help them find their way back. But the forest seemed to resist his efforts, the broken branches healing within minutes, the stone cairns toppling as soon as he turned his back. He mentioned it to the others, but they laughed it off, accused him of paranoia, told him he was seeing things. Maybe he was. The air was getting to him, the dampness, the smell of rot and fungus that seemed to intensify with every step. He was breathing too fast, his heart racing, his skin prickling with the sense of being watched, being hunted, being herded toward something terrible. "Wait," he called out, his voice cracking. "I need to stop, I need to." He didn't finish, because in that moment Marcus Chen vanished. 1 second he was there, walking 3 steps ahead of Paul, his expensive camo gear blending with the undergrowth. The next he was gone, as if the forest had simply opened up and swallowed him whole. "Marcus," Dick called out, his voice uncertain for the first time. "Marcus, where are you?" Silence. Not just the absence of Marcus's footsteps, but the absence of all sound. The forest had gone quiet, the birds and insects falling silent as if commanded by some invisible force. The only sound was their breathing, ragged and frightened, and the distant drip of water from the leaves. "He's playing a trick," Vinny said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Hiding, trying to scare us." "Marcus," Dick shouted, his voice cracking. "This isn't funny, come out." They spread out, searching, calling. Paul found Marcus's footprints in the mud, leading to a patch of ferns that were suddenly, impossibly flattened, as if something heavy had fallen on them from above. The ferns were weeping, yellow fluid dripping from their fronds, and the smell, that vinegar copper smell, was overwhelming. "Over here," Tim Wilcox called, his voice high with panic. "I found something." They gathered around him, staring down at what he had discovered. It was Marcus's boots, standing upright in a puddle of that same yellow fluid, the laces still tied, the leather still polished. But the boots were filled with the viscous liquid, bubbling and steaming, and Marcus was nowhere to be seen. "Where is he?" Tom asked, his voice a whisper. "Where's his body?" Paul knelt, ignoring the protests of the others, and reached into one of the boots. His hand sank into the fluid, warm and thick, and touched something solid at the bottom. He pulled it out and screamed. It was Marcus's face, or what was left of it. The skin had been dissolved, melted into a pulpy mass that still retained the vague shape of human features. The eyes were gone, replaced by weeping sockets that oozed the same yellow fluid. The mouth was open in a silent scream, the teeth visible through lips that had been eaten away. Paul dropped it, stumbled backward, fell into a patch of poison ivy that he didn't notice. He scrambled to his feet, wiping his hand on his pants, leaving a smear of yellow that began to bubble and smoke. "Get it off," he screamed, tearing at his clothing. "Get it off." He stripped off his jacket, his shirt, leaving him naked from the waist up in the cold forest air. The acid, it had to be acid, nothing else could do that, had eaten through the fabric, was already blistering his skin where it had touched. He rubbed snow on his chest, on his arms, trying to neutralize the burn, trying to stop the damage. "We need to go," Dick said, his voice barely recognizable, stripped of its arrogance. "We need to go now." They ran. There was no order, no leadership, just panic and the desperate need to escape. They crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping their faces, thorns tearing their clothing, the forest seeming to reach out and grab them with every step. Paul ran with them, barefoot now, his boots lost in the mad scramble, his chest burning where the acid had touched him. He could hear something behind them, something moving through the forest with a wet, slithering sound, something that sobbed and wept as it pursued. "Faster!" Dick screamed, though he was falling behind, his 53-year-old body unable to match the pace of the younger men. "Faster!" Vinny fell first. A root caught his ankle, sent him sprawling into a patch of blackberry brambles. He cried out, thrashing, trying to free himself from the thorns. The others didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't look back. They heard his screams turn to gurgles, heard the wet sound of something landing on him, heard the bubbling, dissolving noises that followed. Then silence, and the weeping continued, closer now, right behind them. Tim and Tom ran together, the twins refusing to be separated even in death. They were fast, fit, fueled by terror. But the forest was working against them, the undergrowth thickening, the terrain growing steeper, the air becoming heavy with moisture that made breathing difficult. They reached a clearing, a rare patch of open ground surrounded by hemlock, and stopped, gasping for breath. Behind them the weeping continued, but it seemed to have stopped advancing, to be waiting at the edge of the trees. "What is it?" Tom asked, his voice shaking. "What the fuck is it?" "I don't know," Dick answered, though the question had been directed at the universe, not at him. "I don't know." Paul emerged from the trees, his chest heaving, his naked torso covered in scratches and burns. He had lost his rifle somewhere in the flight, had nothing now but a hunting knife that suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. "We need to keep moving," he said. "It's still out there." "How do you know?" Dick demanded. "How do you know anything?" "Because I can hear it," Paul said, his voice flat. "Can't you? It's crying." They listened, and they heard. A sound like nothing they had ever encountered, a sob that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the trees and the earth and the air itself. It was a sound of pure, distilled grief, of sorrow so profound it transcended language, transcended species, transcended life itself. "What is it?" Tom whispered, his face pale. "What could make a sound like that?" "The squonk," Paul said, the word coming to him unbidden from some deep place in his memory where childhood stories and adult nightmares mingled. "My grandmother used to tell stories about it. The weeping creature, the thing that melts." "That's not real," Dick snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. "That's just a story, a legend." "Marcus's face was real," Paul countered. "Vinny's screaming was real. That sound is real. We need to move. Now." But they were too slow. The sobbing intensified, grew closer, and then the trees at the edge of the clearing began to weep. Sap ran down the trunks, thick and yellow, bubbling as it touched the ground. The clearing was surrounded, cut off, and the only way out was through the thing that was coming. It emerged from the trees like a nightmare-given form. It was large, larger than a man, but its shape was wrong, twisted, as if it had been assembled from parts that didn't quite fit. The skin, if it was skin, was covered in weeping sores, each one oozing that same yellow fluid. The face was the worst, featureless except for the mouth, which hung open in a perpetual wail, and the eyes, which were holes that wept tears of acid. The squonk, the creature that wept for itself and made others weep with it. Tim raised his rifle, his hands shaking so badly he could barely aim. He fired, the shot catching the creature in the chest, and for a moment hope flared, until the wound closed, the bullet hole sealing with a bubble of yellow fluid, and the squonk continued its advance. "Run!" Paul screamed, though there was nowhere to run. "Split up, find a way out." The Wilcox brothers ran together, east toward what they hoped was the trail. They never made it. The squonk turned, its body somehow flowing in two directions at once, and caught them with a swipe of its arm. The touch was enough, the acid skin making contact, and they began to dissolve, their screams rising in harmony as their bodies melted together. Paul ran west, Dick stumbling after him. The squonk let them go, turning its attention to the dying twins, its sobs intensifying as if the act of killing brought it grief rather than satisfaction. Paul didn't look back, didn't dare to see what was happening to his friends, just ran until his lungs gave out and he collapsed against a tree that was weeping sap like blood. "We're going to die," Dick gasped, falling to his knees beside him. "We're going to die here." "Maybe," Paul said, though he didn't feel the terror he expected. He felt something else, something calm and resigned. He had been waiting for this, he realized. Waiting for punishment, waiting for justice. He had killed a man 5 years ago. A hit and run in Philadelphia, driving drunk, leaving the scene, never caught, never punished. The guilt had been eating him alive, driving him to self-destructive behavior, to desperate attempts at normalcy like this hunting trip. He had thought he could escape it in the wilderness, could find redemption through suffering. Now the suffering had found him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though whether to the dead man or the creature hunting them he didn't know. The Squonk emerged from the trees, its weeping form blocking the only path back. It paused, regarding them with those weeping eyes, and Paul felt something touch his mind. Not a voice, not a thought, but an emotion. Grief so profound it made his knees buckle, guilt so crushing it took his breath away, despair so absolute it made him want to die. "It knows," he gasped, falling to the ground. "It knows what we did. It knows what I did." Dick was crying too, tears streaming down his face, his body racked with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside, from the buried guilt and shame that he had spent his life hiding beneath arrogance and accomplishment. The Squonk was feeding on them, he realized, but not on their flesh, on their pain, on their regret, on the darkness they carried inside. The creature advanced, its arms reaching out, and Paul welcomed the end. He deserved this, he knew. Deserved to suffer, to dissolve, to become one with the forest that had judged him and found him wanting. But the Squonk didn't kill him. It paused, its head tilting, and the grief intensified. Not Paul's grief, something else, something older. The creature was weeping for itself, Paul realized, weeping for its own existence, its own pain, its own endless sorrow. It didn't want to kill, it had to kill. The acid, the dissolving, the consumption. These were not weapons but symptoms, manifestations of a creature that could not stop weeping, could not stop destroying everything it touched. "I understand," Paul whispered, reaching out his hand. "I understand." He touched the Squonk. The pain was beyond description, beyond comprehension. His hand began to dissolve, the skin bubbling and peeling, the flesh melting away to reveal bone that blackened and crumbled. But Paul didn't pull away. He held on, staring into those weeping eyes, feeling the creature's infinite sadness as his own. "I'm sorry," he said again, and this time he meant it for the creature. "I'm sorry for what you are. I'm sorry for what you have to do." The Squonk paused. The weeping stopped for just a moment, replaced by something like surprise. No one had ever pitied it before. No one had ever understood. Then the weeping resumed, louder than before, and Paul felt himself dissolving, becoming one with the creature, his pain adding to its own, his regret fueling its endless sorrow. He welcomed it, he welcomed the end. The last thing he saw was Dick Halloway, running away through the trees, the only survivor, the only one who refused to face his guilt, who would carry the horror with him for the rest of his short, broken life. Paul didn't envy him. The Squonk fed and wept and fed again. The forest absorbed what was left, the yellow fluid soaking into the earth, the bones dissolving into nutrients that would feed the trees. By morning, there was no sign that 6 men had entered the forest, no sign that 5 had died, just a weeping patch of ground, a hollow in the earth that filled with yellow fluid whenever it rained. The Squonk moved on, still weeping, still hunting, still seeking something that could end its sorrow. It would not find it, it never did. The Piconos swallowed them all, the way it had swallowed hunters for centuries, the way it would swallow hunters for centuries more. Because some sorrow never ends, some darkness never lifts, some creatures are born to weep and to make others weep with them. And the forest was patient, it had all the time in the world. The town of Hemlock Falls had been dying for 50 years, ever since the logging industry collapsed and the mills closed, and the young people left for cities that promised opportunity. What remained was a collection of weathered buildings clinging to the mountainside like lichen, sustained by tourism that grew thinner every season and a population that grew older every year. It was into this town that Dick Halloway stumbled, 3 days after the hunting trip that should have killed him. He had wandered in the forest for 72 hours, surviving on rainwater and desperation, his mind shattered by what he had witnessed. When he emerged from the trees, blinking in the sunlight like a newborn, he had no memory of how he had gotten there, no memory of the days he had spent wandering, no memory of anything except the weeping creature and the men it had dissolved. The locals found him collapsed on the outskirts of town, muttering about monsters and acid and faces that melted like wax. They took him to the clinic, where Dr. Elena Vargas treated him for exposure, dehydration, and psychological trauma. She asked him what had happened, what he had seen, where his companions were. He told her everything: the footprints, the yellow fluid, the way Marcus had vanished, then Vinny, then the twins, then Paul, the creature that wept and dissolved, the hands that had reached for him, the eyes that had wept tears of acid. Dr. Vargas listened, her face carefully neutral, and made notes in his file. When she finished, she called the sheriff, and they had a conversation in hushed tones that Dick couldn't quite hear. Then they brought in someone else, an old man with a face like weathered leather and hands that smelled of tobacco and wood smoke. "This is Elias Crane," Dr. Vargas said. "He wants to talk to you." Crane sat in the chair beside Dick's bed, his eyes boring into him with an intensity that was uncomfortable. "You saw it," the old man said. "It wasn't a question." "I saw something," Dick whispered, his voice hoarse. "I don't know what." "You saw the Squonk," Crane said. "The weeping one, the thing that makes you regret." Dick laughed, a hysterical sound that ended in a sob. "That's just a story, a legend." "Legends are stories that are true," Crane said. "Your friends are dead, dissolved, eaten by sorrow. The only reason you're alive is because you ran, because you refused to face what you'd done." "What I'd done? I didn't do anything. I was hunting, that's all. I was." "You were hunting in its territory," Crane interrupted. "You walked where you shouldn't have walked. You disturbed something ancient. And now 5 men are dead and you're here, and it's still out there, still weeping, still waiting for the next fools who think they own these mountains." Dick stared at him, the words sinking in slowly. "What is it?" he asked. "Really?" Crane leaned back, reaching into his pocket for a pouch of chewing tobacco. He took a pinch, tucked it into his cheek, and began to speak, his voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. "The Squonk has been here longer than humans," he said. "Longer than the trees, maybe. It doesn't belong here, not really. It's from somewhere else, somewhere deep in the earth, somewhere the light never reaches. It came up through the caves, the limestone karst that honeycombs these mountains. Found the surface, found the forest, found creatures that could feel sorrow." "It feeds on sorrow?" Dick asked. "It feeds on everything," Crane corrected. "But sorrow makes the feeding easier. The more you regret, the more you grieve, the easier it is for the Squonk to dissolve you. The acid, that's not just physical. It's emotional, mental, spiritual. It finds the darkness in you, magnifies it, until you dissolve yourself from the inside out." Dick thought of Paul, reaching out to the creature, welcoming dissolution. He thought of the twins, fused together in their final moments. He thought of Marcus's face, still recognizable despite the melting. "Why?" he asked. "Why does it do this?" Crane spat tobacco juice into a cup he carried for that purpose. "Because it's lonely," he said. "Because it's sad. Because it weeps for itself and it wants company in its grief. It doesn't want to kill. It has to kill. The acid, the dissolving, that's just what it is. It can't touch anything without destroying it. It's been alone for millennia, and it will be alone for millennia more, weeping and dissolving and weeping again." "Can it be killed?" Dick asked, though he wasn't sure why. He didn't want revenge. He wanted understanding. He wanted the horror to make sense. "Nothing that weeps can be killed," Crane said. "You can hurt it maybe, drive it away temporarily, but kill it, no. It's part of the mountain now, part of the forest, part of the sorrow that lives in these hills." "Then what do I do?" Dick asked. "How do I live with this?" Crane looked at him, and for a moment his weathered face showed something like pity. "You don't," he said. "You survived because you ran, because you refused to face your guilt. But that guilt is still there. The Squonk smelled it on you. It will find you again. It always finds the ones who run. So I'm dead either way." "We're all dead either way," Crane said. "The question is how you spend the time you have. You can spend it running, hiding, pretending the horror doesn't exist, or you can spend it fighting, helping others, making sure no one else walks into those woods unprepared. He stood, tucking his tobacco pouch back in his pocket. "The choice is yours," he said, "but choose quickly. The Squonk is patient, but it's not patient forever." He left, and Dick was alone with his thoughts, his memories, his guilt. He thought of the hit and run, the man he had killed in Philadelphia 5 years ago. He had never told anyone, had buried the secret so deep he had almost convinced himself it hadn't happened. But the Squonk had smelled it. The Squonk had known. He thought of his failed marriages, his estranged children, the thousands of lives he had destroyed through his financial dealings without ever looking back. The Squonk had smelled those too. He was guilty. He was guilty of so much, and he had never faced it, never owned it, never tried to make it right. Paul had faced it. Paul had reached out, had welcomed the dissolution, had found peace in the acceptance of his guilt. The others had resisted, had fought, had tried to run, and they had died screaming. But Paul had died smiling. Dick made his decision. He would not run. He would not hide. He would face the Squonk again on his own terms and either find redemption or find death. He checked himself out of the clinic that night, against medical advice, against the sheriff's orders, against common sense and self-preservation. He walked into the forest with nothing but a flashlight and a knife, following the path the Squonk had taken, tracking the weeping fluid that still bubbled up from the ground. He found the creature in a clearing, surrounded by the bones of its victims, weeping into a pool of its own tears. It looked up as he approached, those weeping eyes fixing on him with an expression that might have been surprise. "I'm here," Dick said, his voice steady despite his fear. "I ran before, I won't run again." The Squonk rose, its form shifting and flowing, the acid dripping from its skin in slow, viscous drops. It approached him, arms reaching out, and Dick stood his ground, refusing to flinch, refusing to flee. "I killed a man," he said, the words coming easier than he expected. "I destroyed lives, I hurt people. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." The Squonk paused. The weeping intensified, but this time it was different. Not the predatory sorrow of the hunt, but something else. Recognition, understanding. It reached out and touched Dick's face, the acid burning, dissolving, but Dick didn't pull away. He accepted the pain, accepted the punishment, accepted the justice he had spent his life avoiding. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, and then the darkness took him. The search party found what was left 2 days later, a jacket pristine and dry with a note inside that was still damp, the ink dissolving even as they read it. "I deserve this," it said. "I'm sorry." Behind them, something sniffled in the bushes, but when they turned, there was nothing there. Just the forest and the weeping, and the sorrow that would never end. Elias Crane buried what they found, said a prayer over the grave, and went back to his cabin. He had tried to warn them. He always tried to warn them. But no one ever listened until it was too late. The Squonk wept on, alone in the darkness, waiting for the next hunters, the next sinners, the next broken souls who thought they could escape their guilt in the wilderness. The Poconos were patient. They had all the time in the world. Dr. Sarah Chen had not expected to find herself back in the Poconos, not after what had happened in Texas, not after the slaughterhouse and the chupacabra, and the things she had seen that defied rational explanation. She had gone back to her veterinary practice, had tried to return to normalcy, had spent months treating dogs and cats and horses while pretending that monsters weren't real. But the nightmares wouldn't stop. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the chupacabra's red eyes, felt the heat of the flamethrower in her hands, smelled the sulfur and rot of the creature's blood. And then, worse, she saw the faces of the creatures she had killed, not just the chupacabra, but the adult protecting its young, the look of intelligence and grief in its eyes as it surrendered its offspring. She had killed things that understood sacrifice, things that loved their children. She had become a monster herself, burning creatures alive, threatening young ones, becoming the very thing she had once hunted. The The guilt was eating her alive. It woke her at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs. It followed her through her days, making her hands shake as she examined animals, making her voice crack as she spoke to clients, making her question every decision, every diagnosis, every life she held in her hands. She was unraveling, and she knew it. The letter from Elias Crane arrived on a Tuesday, hand-addressed, the envelope smelling of wood smoke and tobacco. Inside was a single page, covered in cramped handwriting that looked like it belonged to another century. "The Squonk has found you," it read. "Not the creature itself, but its influence, the despair, the guilt, it's spreading, Dr. Chen, finding those who have reason to regret. You're infected, you need to come before it's too late." She should have thrown the letter away, should have reported it to the police as the ramblings of a crazy old man, should have done anything but what she did. She went. Hemlock Falls was smaller than she expected, a dying town clinging to the mountainside like moss on a rock. The people she passed on the street looked at her with hollow eyes, expressions of exhaustion and resignation that she recognized from her own mirror. They were infected too, she realized. All of them, living in the shadow of something they didn't understand, feeling the weight of sorrows they couldn't name. Crane's cabin was on the outskirts, a rough-hewn structure that looked like it had grown organically from the forest floor. He met her at the door, his weathered face unreadable, his eyes boring into her with an intensity that made her want to turn and run. "You came," he said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I didn't have a choice," she said, though she wasn't sure if that was true. "No one ever does," Crane agreed, stepping aside to let her enter. The cabin was exactly what she expected, cluttered with books and maps and strange artifacts, the walls covered with newspaper clippings about disappearances and deaths. In the center of the main room, a fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with purpose. "Tell me what you know," Crane said, settling into a chair that creaked beneath his weight. Sarah told him. About Texas, about the chupacabra, about the war she had fought and the creatures she had killed. About the guilt that had followed her, that grew stronger every day, that made her wish for dissolution, for an end to the pain. "The Squonk doesn't need to touch you," Crane said when she finished. "Its influence spreads through the air, through the water, through the very stones of these mountains. It finds those who are already broken, already grieving, already regretting, and it amplifies those feelings. It makes you want to dissolve, to become one with its sorrow." "Is that what happened to the hunters?" Sarah asked. "The ones who disappeared last month?" "Richard Halloway and his friends," Crane confirmed. "They came to hunt, but they were already guilty, already carrying sins that weighed them down. The Squonk found them, fed on their guilt, dissolved them all. All except Halloway, who ran, but he came back eventually, faced it, accepted his punishment. He dissolved willingly." "The only way to defeat the Squonk is to stop fighting," Crane said. "To accept the sorrow, to welcome the dissolution. Those who resist, who try to run, who refuse to face their guilt, they die screaming. Those who accept, who embrace the pain, who let themselves be dissolved, they find peace." "That's not defeat," Sarah said. "That's suicide." "Is there a difference?" Crane asked. "When the sorrow is endless, when the guilt is absolute, when life itself becomes unbearable, isn't dissolution a mercy?" Sarah didn't answer. She was thinking of the nights she had spent contemplating the gun in her drawer, the pills in her cabinet, the razor in her medicine kit. She was thinking of how close she had come, how many times, to ending the pain. "You're further gone than I thought," Crane observed, his voice soft. "The Squonk has been feeding on you for months, since Texas probably. You killed creatures that loved their young, and the guilt of that act has been eating you alive. Now it's ready to finish the job." "What do I do?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have 3 choices," Crane said. 1, you leave. Run far away to somewhere the Squonk's influence doesn't reach. The city maybe, or another country. You might survive, though the guilt will follow you. You'll spend your life running, hiding, trying to outpace the sorrow. 2. You face it. Go into the forest, find the squonk, accept your guilt, welcome the dissolution. You'll die, but you'll die at peace. No more pain, no more regret. Just release. And 3. Crane leaned forward, his eyes burning with an intensity that was almost frightening. You fight it. You find the squonk's weakness. You learn its patterns. You prepare yourself mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and you go to war. You might die. You will probably die, but you'll die fighting, not surrendering. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find a way to kill it. You said it can't be killed. I said nothing that weeps can be killed, Crane corrected. But that assumes the weeping is real. What if it's not? What if the sorrow is a defense, a camouflage, a way to make itself seem pitiable when it's actually the most dangerous predator in these woods? Sarah stared at him, processing. You think it's faking? I think it's complicated, Crane said. I think the squonk does feel sorrow, does weep, does suffer. But I also think it uses that suffering as a weapon. It makes you feel sorry for it, makes you want to comfort it, and while you're embracing it, trying to soothe its pain, it dissolves you. It's a trap, the greatest trap ever evolved. So how do we beat it? We don't embrace it, Crane said. We don't pity it. We don't try to understand it or comfort it or share its sorrow. We treat it like what it is, a predator, a killer, a monster that needs to be destroyed. With what? You said weapons don't work. Physical weapons don't work, Crane agreed. But psychological weapons might. The squonk feeds on guilt and regret. What if we gave it something else? Something it couldn't digest? Like what? Crane smiled, a grim expression that didn't reach his eyes. Joy, he said. Pure, unadulterated joy. Acceptance without regret. Happiness without guilt. The complete absence of sorrow. How do we generate that on demand? We don't, Crane said. But we can fake it. We can act. We can pretend to be happy, content, at peace with ourselves and our actions. We can present a psychological profile that gives the squonk nothing to work with. And then what? And then we find its lair. We destroy its young. We make it angry, make it desperate, make it act out of rage instead of sorrow. And when it's vulnerable, when its defenses are down, we strike. Destroy its young, Sarah repeated, her voice flat. Like I tried to do in Texas. Like you did in Texas, Crane agreed. That was your mistake, Dr. Chen. You hesitated, you showed mercy. The squonk won't show mercy to you. Sarah thought of the chupacabra young, the creature she had held at gunpoint. She thought of the choice she had made to let them go, to give them a chance. Was that mercy, or was it weakness? I need time, she said. You don't have time, Crane replied. The squonk is coming, I can feel it. The weeping is getting louder, closer. It knows you're here. It's been waiting for you. As if in response, the cabin shook, a vibration that rattled the windows and made the floorboards creak. Outside, the wind rose, carrying with it a sound that made Sarah's blood run cold. The sound of sobbing, of weeping, of infinite sorrow. It's here, Crane whispered, reaching for a shotgun that hung above the door. Get ready. But Sarah wasn't ready. She was still thinking, still processing, still torn between the three choices Crane had laid out. Run, surrender, or fight. Each seemed impossible, each seemed inevitable. The door exploded inward, splinters flying, and the squonk filled the doorway, its weeping form blocking out the moonlight, its acid tears dripping onto the floorboards and burning holes through the wood. It looked at Sarah, and she felt her guilt intensify, her regrets multiply, her sorrows become overwhelming. She thought of every animal she had failed to save, every creature she had killed, every mistake she had made. The weight of it crushed her, drove her to her knees, made her want to dissolve, to become nothing, to escape the pain. Don't, Crane shouted, firing his shotgun. The buckshot hit the squonk in the chest, passing through without effect, but the sound distracted the creature. Don't embrace it, don't pity it, treat it like a predator. Sarah tried. She forced herself to stand, forced herself to look at the creature not with pity but with anger, not with sorrow but with defiance. She thought of the good she had done, the lives she had saved, the kindness she had shown. She filled her mind with memories of joy, of love, of satisfaction, pushing back against the tide of regret. It worked. The squonk hesitated, its weeping faltering as if confused by her resistance. It reached for her and she slapped its hand away, ignoring the burn of the acid, ignoring the pain. "No," she shouted. "You don't get me. I'm not sorry. I've done good. I've helped people. I've saved lives. You can't have my guilt because I don't feel guilty." The lie was transparent, but the squonk seemed to believe it. It recoiled, its form shifting, becoming less certain, less solid. It was confused, thrown off by prey that refused to cooperate, that wouldn't provide the emotional sustenance it needed. "Now," Crane shouted, and he threw something. A glass jar filled with liquid that shattered against the squonk's chest. The creature screamed, a sound that shattered windows and set off car alarms for miles. The liquid, holy water, Sarah realized, blessed by some priest decades ago, was burning it, smoking against its skin, creating wounds that didn't heal immediately. "Run," Crane commanded, "while it's distracted." They ran through the back door into the forest, into the darkness. Behind them the squonk's screams faded, replaced by the sound of weeping, of pursuit, of ancient sorrow that would not be denied. They ran for hours, until their lungs burned and their legs gave out, until they collapsed against a fallen log and listened to the sounds of the forest. The weeping was distant now, confused, searching. It had lost them temporarily, but it would find them again. It always did. "We need a plan," Sarah gasped, her chest heaving. "A real plan." "We have one," Crane said, his voice tight with pain. He was clutching his arm where a drop of squonk acid had caught him, burning through his jacket and into the flesh beneath. "We find its lair. We destroy its young. We make it angry, and when it attacks out of rage instead of sorrow, we kill it." "How?" "I have ideas," Crane said. "Old methods, minor techniques, things that hurt creatures of stone and sorrow." "Will they work?" Crane looked at her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "No idea," he admitted, "but it's better than running, better than surrendering, better than dissolving." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure she agreed. The guilt was still there, still eating at her, still making her want to give up, give in, become one with the sorrow. But Crane was right about one thing. It was better to die fighting than to dissolve. They rested until dawn, then began their preparations. The war against the squonk had begun. And neither side would show mercy. They found the lair 3 days later, following tracks that only Crane could see, reading signs that Sarah would have missed entirely. The squonk didn't leave footprints in the traditional sense, but it left traces. Bubbles in still water, yellow stains on tree bark, patches of earth that wept when touched. The lair was in a cave, naturally, hidden behind a waterfall that masked the entrance and filled the air with mist and the roar of falling water. They approached cautiously, weapons ready, hearts pounding. The cave was warmer than it should have been, the air thick with moisture and the smell of vinegar and copper. The walls wept, yellow fluid running down the stone in slow rivulets, pooling on the floor in puddles that bubbled and steamed. "Acid," Crane whispered, pointing to the pools. "Don't touch it, don't let it touch you." They moved deeper, following the tunnel as it sloped downward into the earth. The light faded, their flashlights casting shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. The weeping grew louder, echoing off the stone, filling their ears with the sound of infinite sorrow. Then they saw them, the young. They were in a chamber, a cathedral of stone that opened up before them, its ceiling lost in darkness, its floor covered in what looked like eggs but couldn't be. They were clusters of yellow fluid held together by membranes that pulsed and throbbed, each one containing a shape that might have been a creature, might have been a fetus, might have been something else entirely. There were hundreds of them, thousands maybe, laid out in rows, tended by nothing, growing, developing, waiting to hatch. Binary fission, Sarah breathed, recognizing the biological process from her veterinary training. It's not breeding, it's splitting, dividing. Each one becomes two, two become four, four become. An army, Crane finished. A plague, a forest full of weeping creatures that dissolve everything they touch. We need to destroy them, Sarah said, reaching for the flamethrower she had brought, the same weapon she had used in Texas. Wait, Crane said, grabbing her arm. Look. He pointed to the center of the chamber, where something larger moved among the egg clusters. The Squonk itself, the parent, the original, weeping over its young with a sorrow that transcended species and time. It sensed them immediately, its head snapping up, those weeping eyes fixing on them with an expression that mixed grief with rage. It had been found, its lair invaded, its young threatened. The sorrow was giving way to anger, exactly as Crane had planned. You shouldn't have come, it said, and the voice was in their minds, not their ears, a telepathic communication that bypassed sound entirely. You should have run. You should have surrendered. Now you will die screaming. We don't surrender, Crane shouted, raising his weapon, and we don't pity you. He fired, the buckshot hitting the Squonk in the face, tearing through its weeping eyes and sending yellow fluid spraying. The creature screamed, a sound that made the stone vibrate, and lunged. Sarah triggered the flamethrower, filling the chamber with fire. The egg clusters burst, their contents spilling onto the floor, sizzling and burning as the fire consumed them. The Squonk screamed again, but this time there was no sorrow in the sound, only rage, pure and absolute. My children, it shrieked, the voice in their minds becoming a hammer that drove them to their knees. My children. Keep firing, Crane commanded, reloading, firing again. Don't stop, don't give it a chance. Sarah swept the flamethrower across the chamber, burning everything she could see. The egg clusters exploded, the yellow fluid catching fire, filling the air with acrid smoke that burned their lungs and eyes. The Squonk thrashed, its form becoming less solid, less certain, as if the rage was destabilizing it. It's working, Crane shouted. Keep going. But the Squonk was adapting, learning, changing. Its form shifted, becoming more solid, more stone-like, less vulnerable to fire. It charged, moving with terrifying speed, and caught Crane with a swipe of its arm. The old man flew across the chamber, hitting the wall with a sickening crunch. He slid down, leaving a smear of red on the stone, and didn't move. Crane, Sarah screamed, turning the flamethrower on the Squonk again. But the creature was ready now, its stone skin protecting it from the flames. It advanced, weeping and raging, sorrow and anger mixing into an emotion that was beyond human understanding. You burned my children, it said, the voice in her mind filled with such grief that Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. You destroyed my future. Now I will destroy you. It reached for her, and Sarah felt her guilt intensify, her regrets overwhelming her. She thought of the chupacabra young, the ones she had spared, the ones that would grow up to kill more people. She thought of every mistake she had ever made, every life she had failed to save, every wrong decision that had led her here. The weight of it crushed her, drove her to her knees, made her want to give up. No, she screamed, fighting against the despair. I won't dissolve. Then burn, the Squonk said, and its acid tears fell on her, burning through her clothing, her skin, her flesh. Sarah screamed, thrashing, trying to escape. But the creature held her, its arms wrapping around her like a lover, its weeping face pressed against hers. Accept it, it whispered. Accept the sorrow, let yourself dissolve, find peace. No, Sarah gasped, though the pain was overwhelming. No, I won't. She felt her skin beginning to melt, her flesh bubbling and sloughing off, her bones exposed to the air. She was dissolving, becoming one with the creature, her substance merging with its own. You fought well, the Squonk said, and there was something like respect in its voice. But everyone dissolves eventually. Everyone weeps. Everyone surrenders. Sarah felt her consciousness fading, her identity dissolving, becoming part of the creature's endless sorrow. She was dying, not physically but spiritually, herself being consumed by the Squonk's grief. Then she remembered Crane's words. The only way to defeat the Squonk is to stop fighting, to accept the sorrow, to welcome the dissolution. She had been fighting, resisting, struggling against the inevitable. What if she did the opposite? What if she accepted? Not the sorrow, not the grief, but the end, the release, the peace that came from no longer fighting. She stopped struggling. She let her body go limp, let her mind go blank, let herself become nothing. And in that moment of absolute surrender, she felt something else, something the Squonk didn't expect. Acceptance, without sorrow, without regret, just release. The creature hesitated, confused. It was used to prey that dissolved in agony, screaming and weeping and begging for mercy. But Sarah wasn't screaming. She wasn't weeping. She was simply accepting. "What are you doing?" the Squonk asked, its voice uncertain. "I'm letting go," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm not sorry, I'm not guilty, I'm just done." The Squonk tried to feed on her regret, her guilt, her sorrow, but there was nothing there. Just emptiness, just peace, just the absence of emotion that it couldn't digest. It dropped her, stumbling back, its form becoming unstable, uncertain. "No," it said. "No, this is wrong, this is not how it works. You must weep, you must regret, you must." "I don't," Sarah said, climbing to her feet despite her burns, despite her pain. "I accept what I've done. I accept who I am. I accept my mistakes, and I don't regret them. They made me who I am." The Squonk screamed, a sound of pure frustration, and lunged again. But this time Sarah was ready. She didn't fight, didn't resist, simply stepped aside and let the creature's momentum carry it past her. It crashed into the wall, its stone form cracking, yellow fluid leaking from the fissures. Sarah saw her chance. She grabbed Crane's shotgun from where he had dropped it, aimed at the cracks in the creature's skin, and fired. The buckshot penetrated, entering the fissures, tearing through the vulnerable flesh beneath. The Squonk screamed, thrashing, trying to heal itself, but the damage was too great, too extensive. "You can't kill me," it shrieked. "I am sorrow, I am grief, I am eternal." "You're not eternal," Sarah said, firing again. "You're just sad, and I'm done being sad for you." She emptied the shotgun into the creature, watching it dissolve, watching its form lose cohesion, watching it become nothing but a puddle of yellow fluid on the cave floor. The weeping stopped, the sorrow lifted, the cave went silent. Sarah collapsed, her strength gone, her body ruined. She had won, but at what cost? Crane was dead, his body cooling against the wall. The Squonk was destroyed, but how many more were out there, waiting to emerge from their eggs, waiting to continue the cycle? She lay there for hours, drifting in and out of consciousness, waiting for death or rescue, whichever came first. When the search party finally found her, following the smoke from the burned eggs, she was barely alive, her body covered in burns, her mind shattered by what she had experienced. But she was alive, and the Squonk was dead. Or so she thought. The hospital was white, sterile, suffocating in its cleanliness. Sarah lay in a bed that wasn't hers, surrounded by machines that beeped and hissed, attended by nurses who smiled with professional compassion and doctors who spoke in hushed tones about her prognosis. Degree burns over 40% of her body. Infection. Shock. She shouldn't have survived, they said. She was lucky to be alive. Sarah didn't feel lucky. She felt empty, hollow, as if the Squonk had taken something from her that couldn't be replaced. She thought of Crane, dead in that cave, of the creatures she had killed, the lives she had taken, of the guilt that still lurked at the edges of her consciousness, waiting to return. She had defeated the Squonk, but she hadn't defeated herself. The sorrow was still there, waiting, patient as the mountains themselves. The doctor who visited her on the third day was different from the others. older, with eyes that held too much knowledge, a smile that didn't quite reach his expression. "Dr. Chen," he said, checking her chart. "I'm Dr. Morrison. I specialize in unusual cases." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, despite the painkillers that dulled everything. "Unusual how?" "Cases involving psychological trauma," Morrison said. "Cases where the trauma seems to have physical manifestations. Cases where the patient has encountered something that shouldn't exist." Sarah stared at him. "You know." "I know," Morrison confirmed. "I've known for years. The Squonk, the Chupacabra, the Rougarou, they're real. They're out there. And they leave marks on those who survive." "Marks?" "Psychological, spiritual, some would say supernatural." Morrison pulled up a chair, sitting close enough that she could smell his cologne, something medicinal and sharp. "You defeated the Squonk, Dr. Chen, but defeating it isn't the same as escaping it. Its influence lingers. Its sorrow becomes yours." "I'm fine," Sarah lied. "You're not fine." Morrison's voice was gentle but firm. "You're dissolving just slowly. The burns will heal, but the sorrow won't. It's eating you from the inside the same way the Squonk's acid ate your skin, and eventually it will consume you completely." "What do I do?" Morrison reached into his pocket, withdrew a small vial of yellow fluid. "This is Squonk tears," he said, "collected from the creature you killed. They're still potent, still active, still alive in a way." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because there's a choice to make," Morrison said. "You can fight the sorrow, try to outlast it, hope that time and therapy will heal what the creature broke. Or," he held up the vial, "you can embrace it, control it, use it." "Use it how?" "The Squonk's sorrow is contagious, but it's also focused, directional. You could use it against others. Spread the grief, the despair, the dissolution. You could become a weapon." Sarah stared at him, horrified. "You want me to become a monster?" "I want you to survive," Morrison corrected. "The Squonk may be dead, but its kind aren't. There are others out there waiting to emerge. And when they do, humanity will need weapons to fight them. Weapons like you." "I won't," Sarah said. "I won't become what I fought." "Then you'll die," Morrison said simply. "The sorrow will consume you, and you'll dissolve just like all the others. The only difference is how long it takes." He stood, tucking the vial back into his pocket. "Think about it," he said. "You have time, not much but some. When you're ready to decide, call me." He left a card on her nightstand. Just a name and a number. No address, no title, no indication of who he really was or what organization he represented. Sarah lay in the darkness thinking. She thought of the choice before her: become a monster or die as prey, fight the sorrow or embrace it, use the weapon or be destroyed by it. She thought of Crane, of his sacrifice, of his determination to fight to the end. She thought of her father, of his advice from her childhood: never become what you fight against. She made her decision. When the nurse came to check her vitals the next morning, Sarah Chen was gone. Her bed was empty, her clothes folded neatly on the chair, the monitoring equipment showing flat lines that suggested she had disconnected herself hours ago. On the pillow there was a note written in shaky handwriting: "I'm sorry, I can't do this. Please forgive me." They found her body 3 days later in the Poconos, in a clearing where the ground wept yellow fluid. She had dissolved completely, leaving nothing but her clothes and that note, the ink already fading, the paper damp with something that might have been tears. The official cause of death was suicide, though how she had managed to dissolve herself remained a mystery. The unofficial cause, whispered among those who knew, was the Squonk's final victory, one last victim claimed from beyond the grave. But there were those who wondered, who noted that her body was found miles from where the Squonk had died, who questioned whether she had truly succumbed to sorrow or whether she had made a different choice entirely. Dr. Morrison collected the vial from her room, untouched, unused. He wondered, as he did with all his patients, whether she had taken the third option he hadn't mentioned, the option of becoming something else entirely, something that didn't need sorrow to survive. He never found out. No one did. The Poconos swallowed Sarah Chen the way they swallowed all the others, taking her into their green embrace, making her part of the forest, part of the sorrow, part of the endless weeping. The Squonk was dead, but its influence lingered. The sorrow spread, finding new hosts, new victims, new broken souls who couldn't resist the call of dissolution. And somewhere in the mountains, something new was growing, something that had learned from the Squonk's defeat, something that didn't weep, didn't dissolve, didn't give its prey the mercy of a quick end. Something worse. The cycle continued, the darkness wept, and the forest was patient. It had all the time in the world. The hikers found the jacket 6 weeks after Sarah Chen's disappearance, on a trail that had been closed due to dangerous conditions, according to the Forest Service signs that few bothered to read. It was a pristine hunting jacket, expensive Gore-Tex that should have been ruined by weeks of exposure to the elements, but instead looked freshly laundered, laid out carefully on a flat stone beside the trail as if placed there deliberately. The note was in the pocket, written on paper that was damp despite the clear weather, the ink still dissolving into the fibers even as they read it. The message was simple, terrifying in its brevity. It doesn't end. It never ends. Run while you can. Behind them, something sniffled in the bushes. The hikers, 3 college students from Penn State who had ignored the warnings in search of a genuine wilderness experience for their TikTok channel, turned toward the sound, their cameras rolling, their followers waiting for content. They expected a deer, maybe a bear, something to generate views and comments. They didn't expect the weeping. It started softly, a sound like a child crying in the distance, and then grew louder, closer, surrounding them from all directions. The forest seemed to close in, the trees leaning toward them, the undergrowth thickening, the path disappearing behind walls of fern and thorn. "Dude, what is that?" Jake asked, his voice cracking. He was the leader, the one with the most followers, the one who had convinced the others that the warnings were just to scare tourists. "I don't know," Brianna said, clutching her phone like a talisman. "Should we run?" "Where?" Marcus asked, looking around at the suddenly unfamiliar forest. "I don't even know which way is out anymore." The weeping intensified, and then they saw it. The Squonk, or something like it. It was smaller than the stories suggested, barely 4 feet tall, but its sorrow was absolute, overwhelming, crushing. It emerged from the trees with a wet, slithering sound, its yellow fluid dripping onto the trail, its weeping eyes fixed on them with an expression of infinite grief. "Help me," it whispered, and the voice was in their minds, in their hearts, in their very souls. "I'm so alone. I'm so sad. Please help me." Jake took a step forward, his hand reaching out instinctively. "It's okay," he said. "It's just a—" Brianna grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Don't touch it. Look at the ground. Look at what it's doing." The trail where the creature had passed was dissolving, the stone bubbling and softening, the vegetation wilting and blackening. The acid was spreading, creating a path of destruction that led directly to them. "Run!" Marcus screamed, and they did, crashing through the undergrowth, branches whipping their faces, thorns tearing their clothes. Behind them the weeping followed, relentless and patient. They ran for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, their lungs burning, their legs shaking. They reached a clearing, a small patch of open ground surrounded by hemlock, and collapsed against a fallen log, gasping for breath. "Where is it?" Brianna whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of their breathing. "I don't know," Jake said. "Maybe we lost it." But they hadn't. The weeping was closer now, surrounding them, coming from all directions at once. The trees at the edge of the clearing began to weep, sap running down their trunks in thick yellow streams, filling the air with the stench of vinegar and rot. "It's here," Marcus said, his voice flat with resignation. It's been here all along. The squonk emerged from the trees, but it was different now. Changed. Evolved. Its form was more solid, more stable, less vulnerable to the attacks that had killed its predecessor. It had learned, adapted, grown stronger from the death of its parent. "You ran," it said, and there was something like disappointment in its voice. "You always run. No one ever stays. No one ever helps." "We can't help you," Brianna sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "We can't do anything. You're a monster." "I'm lonely," the squonk said. "I'm so lonely. I've been alone for so long. Please stay with me just for a little while, just until I'm not sad anymore." "You'll dissolve us," Jake said, though his voice lacked conviction. He was already feeling the sorrow, the crushing weight of the creature's grief pressing down on his mind. "You'll kill us." "I don't want to kill," the squonk said. "I want to share. I want someone to understand. Is that so wrong?" "Yes," Marcus said, climbing to his feet. "It's wrong. You can't force people to share your pain. You can't make others suffer because you're suffering. That's not how it works." The squonk's weeping intensified, becoming a wail that made the ground shake. "Then what am I supposed to do?" it screamed. "How do I stop hurting? How do I find peace?" "You don't," Marcus said, and there was something in his voice that made the others turn to look at him. "You just endure. You keep going. You find meaning in the pain instead of trying to escape it." He stepped toward the creature, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to run," he said. "I'm not going to fight. I'm just going to be here." "Marcus, no," Brianna screamed. But he was already moving, crossing the clearing, approaching the weeping creature. The squonk watched him come, its weeping eyes wide with something that might have been hope. "You understand," it whispered. "I understand," Marcus agreed. "I understand loneliness. I understand pain. I've felt it my whole life. I know what it's like to want someone to just be there." He stopped 2 feet from the creature, close enough to smell the acid, to feel the heat radiating from its skin. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." The squonk reached out, its hand dripping yellow fluid, and touched his face. The acid burned, sizzled, began to dissolve his skin, but Marcus didn't pull away. He stood his ground, staring into the creature's weeping eyes, accepting the pain. "I'm here," he repeated, his voice steady despite the agony. "I'm here." The weeping stopped. The forest went silent. The squonk stared at him, confused, its hand still touching his dissolving face, its mind struggling to process what was happening. No one had ever done this before. No one had ever stayed, had accepted the pain, had offered companionship without trying to escape. Everyone ran, everyone fought, everyone dissolved in terror and regret. But this one was different. This one was accepting, willingly, freely, without reservation. "Why?" the squonk asked, its voice small, childlike. "Because someone has to," Marcus said, his voice fading as the dissolution spread. "Because if no one ever stays, you'll be alone forever, and no one deserves to be alone forever, not even you." He was dissolving now, his face half gone, his body slumping, but his eyes remained fixed on the creature's, his expression peaceful, accepting. The squonk wept harder, but this time the tears were different. Not acid, not destructive, but something else. Something that might have been gratitude, love, recognition of a sacrifice that transcended species and time. "Thank you," it whispered. And then Marcus dissolved completely, becoming one with the creature, his substance merging with its own. The squonk stood alone in the clearing, surrounded by the weeping trees, and for the first time in its existence, it felt something other than sorrow. It felt hope. Dr. Alina Morrison, no relation to the mysterious Dr. Morrison who had visited Sarah Chen, though the coincidence was noted by those who tracked such things, had been studying the Poconos' disappearances for 3 years. As an anthropologist specializing in contemporary folklore, she had initially approached the subject academically, treating the stories of the squonk as modern mythology, urban legend in a rural setting. Then she found the clearing. It was hidden deep in the forest, accessible only by game trails that disappeared and reappeared according to their own logic. The clearing itself was unremarkable, a patch of open ground surrounded by hemlock, similar to 100 others in the region. But the ground was different. It wept. Not constantly, not obviously, but at certain times under certain conditions. When the moon was full, when the air was heavy with moisture, when someone approached who was carrying enough sorrow, enough guilt, enough despair to attract attention. Alina had been carrying plenty of all three. Her divorce, finalized 6 months ago. Her son's suicide attempt, thwarted but not forgotten. Her career stagnation, her grants denied, her papers rejected. She had come to the Poconos seeking escape and had found something else entirely. The clearing had shown itself to her, had revealed its secret in the form of a puddle of yellow fluid that bubbled and steamed and smelled of her own grief. She had knelt beside it, touched it, felt it burn her finger in a way that was almost welcome. And the Squonk had come. Not to kill her, though it could have. Not to dissolve her, though she had invited it with her despair. But to speak with her, to share its sorrow, to find someone who would listen without running. They had talked for hours, through the night, through the dawn. Alina had learned its history, its nature, its terrible loneliness. She had learned that it was not malevolent, not evil, but simply desperate. A creature that couldn't help what it was, that destroyed everything it touched, that wept eternally for the pain it caused. She had also learned that it was not alone. There were others, many others, spread throughout the Poconos and beyond. A colony of Squonks, multiplying through binary fission, spreading slowly but inevitably. They were patient. They could wait centuries if necessary, and eventually they would cover the world. Unless someone stopped them. Alina had made a choice. Not to fight, not to destroy, but to understand. To help. To create a bridge between human and Squonk, between the species that wept and the species that caused weeping. She had founded the Cult of Weeping, a group dedicated to helping the Squonks, to easing their sorrow, to finding a way for them to exist without destroying everything they touched. They met in secret, in clearings and caves and abandoned buildings, bringing offerings of sorrow and regret that the creatures could feed on without killing. It worked after a fashion. The Squonks that participated in the cult were less destructive, more controlled, able to feed on emotional pain without physical dissolution. They were still dangerous, still capable of killing, but they were learning, adapting, evolving. Alina knew it was a temporary solution at best. The Squonks were still multiplying, still spreading, still destined to overwhelm the world eventually. But it bought time, time to find a better solution, time to understand, time to hope. Then the hunters came. Not the weekend warriors like Richard Halloway and his friends, but professionals. Men and women with weapons and training and government backing, who had been watching the disappearances, who had connected the dots, who understood that something unnatural was happening in the Poconos. They found the cult first, raided the meetings, arrested the members, demanded to know where the creatures were hiding. Alina refused to tell them, endured interrogation, imprisonment, threats. She would not betray the Squonks. They were not monsters. They were victims. They deserved understanding, not extermination. The hunters didn't agree. They saw the Squonks as threats, as dangers to humanity, as aberrations that needed to be destroyed. They tracked the creatures through the forest, using technology and tactics developed for other cryptid hunts. They found them in their clearings, in their caves, in their lairs. And they killed them. Not all of them. The Squonks were clever, elusive, able to dissolve and reform, to hide in liquid form, to escape through cracks and crevices. But enough died. Enough to matter. Enough to drive the survivors deeper, angrier, more dangerous. The war had begun, and Alina was caught in the middle. She escaped captivity during a raid, slipped away in the chaos, fled into the forest where the Squonks would hide her, protect her, keep her safe from her own kind. She became a fugitive, a traitor to humanity, an ally of monsters. But she didn't regret it. Someone had to stand between the species. Someone had to try for peace. Someone had to weep for the Squonks since they could not weep for themselves. The hunters called her the Squonk Queen, a title she rejected but couldn't escape. They put her face on wanted posters, offered rewards for her capture, dead or alive. She became a symbol, a target, a legend in her own right. And the Squonks protected her, kept her hidden, fed her their sorrow in manageable doses so she could survive without dissolving. She became part of their colony, part of their family, the only human who had ever truly understood them. The war raged on. The hunters killed dozens of Squonks, wounded hundreds more, drove the survivors deeper into the wilderness. But the creatures were patient, and they were multiplying, and they were learning. They developed new strategies, new defenses, new ways to hide and hunt and survive. Alina helped them. She taught them about human tactics, about weapons and technology and psychology. She showed them how to avoid traps, how to recognize danger, how to fight back when necessary. She became their general, their advisor, their queen in truth if not in name. And she wondered sometimes if she had made a terrible mistake, if by helping the Squonks survive, she was dooming humanity to eventual extinction. But then she would look at the creatures around her, at their weeping eyes and their eternal sorrow, and she would remember that they were not evil. They were just lonely, just sad, just trying to survive like everything else. The war would continue. The hunters would keep coming, and Alina would keep fighting, keep protecting, keep hoping for a peace that might never come. Because someone had to, because the Squonks deserved a chance, because sorrow, however destructive, was still better than indifference. She wept for them and they wept for her, and the forest absorbed their tears, patient and eternal. The cycle continued. The darkness wept, and the world turned, indifferent to the struggles of monsters and the humans who loved them. The hunter found Alina in the deepest part of the forest, in a cave where the Squonk colony had made its final stand. His name was Cross, no first name given, a government operative who had been tracking cryptids for 20 years. He was gaunt, scarred, hollow-eyed from things he had seen that no human should witness. "Dr. Morrison," he said, his voice echoing in the cave's cathedral darkness. "Or should I call you the Squonk Queen?" "Alina is fine," she said, stepping forward to face him. Behind her, the colony rustled, hundreds of weeping creatures shifting in the shadows. "I've been expecting you. You know why I'm here." "I know." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the pain in his eyes. "You've lost someone to them." Cross flinched, the only crack in his professional armor. "My daughter, 5 years ago in the Poconos. She was hiking alone trying to prove herself. She found a clearing, she didn't come back." "I'm sorry," Alina said, and she meant it. "Don't," Cross snapped. "Don't pity me. Don't give me your sympathy. I know what you are. I know what you've done. You're a traitor to your species, Dr. Morrison. You protect monsters that kill our children." "They don't want to kill," Alina said. "They're just lonely." Cross laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Sad, I've heard it all before. Every excuse, every justification, every pathetic attempt to make genocide sympathetic. They're not victims, Dr. Morrison. They're predators. They dissolve people. They destroy lives. They have to be stopped." "And if they can't be stopped," Alina asked, "if killing them only makes them angrier, stronger, more numerous, what then?" "Then we kill more," Cross said simply. "Until they're all dead, until the threat is eliminated. That's how you deal with monsters." "They're not monsters," Alina said. "They're just different. They don't fit into our world, our rules, our morality. That doesn't make them evil." "Tell that to my daughter," Cross said, raising his weapon. The Squonks reacted, surging forward, weeping, dissolving, attacking. Cross fired, the incendiary rounds catching the nearest creatures, burning them, but there were too many, far too many. The colony swarmed him, their acid dissolving his armor, his skin, his flesh. Elena watched, unable to help, unable to stop it. She had wanted peace, understanding, coexistence, but Cross had brought war and the Squonks had responded in kind. He died screaming, dissolved by the creatures he had hunted, becoming part of the colony that had taken his daughter before him. The Squonks fed on his grief, his rage, his sorrow, and grew stronger. Elena wept, for Cross, for his daughter, for the endless cycle of violence that seemed to have no solution, for the Squonks who couldn't help what they were, for herself who had tried so hard and failed so completely. "Is this what you want?" she asked the colony, her voice breaking. "Is this what you are, killers, destroyers? Is there nothing else?" The largest Squonk, the matriarch of the colony, approached her. It had no face, no features, but its weeping eyes held something that might have been apology. "We don't want this," it said, its voice in her mind soft and sad. "But we won't die. We won't let you exterminate us. If we must kill to survive, we will kill. If we must dissolve your species to protect our own, we will dissolve. We are sorry. We are so sorry, but we will not die." "Then what?" Elena asked. "What happens now? War, genocide, extermination? Is that the only future?" "There is another way," the matriarch said. "A way we have never shown anyone, a way to end the sorrow." "Tell me." "Separation," the creature said. "We leave. We find another world, another place where we can exist without destroying. The caves go deep, Dr. Morrison, deeper than you know. There are places beneath the earth where we could live, where no human would ever find us." "You would leave?" Elena asked, stunned. "Give up the surface, go into the dark?" "We are creatures of the dark," the matriarch said. "The light hurts us. The sun burns us. We came to the surface because we were lonely, because we wanted company, because we thought we could share our sorrow and find relief. But we were wrong. We cannot share. We can only dissolve." "So you'll go?" Elena asked. "Really?" "If you help us," the matriarch said. "If you make the humans stop hunting us, give us time to descend, to seal the caves behind us, if you ensure that no one follows. And then we will be gone. Forever, you will never see us again. The disappearances will stop. The dissolutions will end. And you will be left alone with your sorrow." Elena thought about it. A world without Squonks, without the constant threat of dissolution, without the war that was consuming both species. But also a world without the only creatures who truly understood her, without the colony that had accepted her, protected her, made her part of their family, without the purpose that had given her life meaning after everything else had fallen apart. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll help you leave." The evacuation took weeks. Elena negotiated with the government, using Cross's death as leverage, threatening to reveal the truth about the Cryptid wars if they didn't agree to a truce. They resisted at first, demanded extermination, insisted on total victory. But Elena held firm, and eventually they relented. A deal was struck. The Squonks would descend, would disappear into the deep earth, would never return to the surface. In exchange, humanity would leave them alone, would seal the caves, would pretend they had never existed. The Squonks left at midnight on the summer solstice, when the barrier between worlds was thinnest. They descended into the caves, thousands of them, a river of weeping yellow flowing into the darkness. Elena stood at the entrance, watching them go, feeling her heart break with every step they took away from her. "Come with us," the matriarch said, pausing at the threshold. "You could survive in the deep places, we could protect you, you could be with us, forever." Elena wanted to. More than anything, she wanted to follow them into the dark, to leave behind the world that had hurt her so badly, to find peace in dissolution. But she couldn't. She was human, and humans belonged to the light, even when the light hurt. She couldn't abandon her species, her world, her duty to both. "Go," she said, her voice breaking, "and be at peace." The matriarch touched her face, a gentle caress that burned but didn't dissolve, a farewell from one sorrow to another. Then it turned and descended, following its children into the earth. Elena stood alone, watching the darkness, until the first light of dawn touched the cave entrance. Then she turned and walked away, back to the world she had saved, back to the sorrow she had earned. The caves were sealed behind her, dynamite bringing down tons of rock that would ensure no human ever followed the Squonks into the deep. The colony was gone, truly gone, and the Poconos were safe again. Or so they thought. Elena knew better. She knew that the Squonks were patient, that they could wait centuries if necessary, that someday they would find a way back. She knew that sorrow never truly ended, that darkness always returned, that the cycle was eternal. But for now, for this moment, there was peace. The weeping had stopped, the dissolving had ceased, the forest was quiet. She walked through the trees alone, her heart heavy with the weight of her choices. She had saved humanity from the Squonks, but at what cost? She had betrayed the creatures she loved, sent them into exile, condemned them to eternal darkness. She had done the right thing, she knew, the necessary thing, the only thing. But right didn't mean easy, necessary didn't mean painless, and the sorrow she carried would never truly end. Behind her in the sealed cave, something sniffled. A young Squonk left behind, forgotten in the rush of departure. It wept alone in the darkness, abandoned by its kind, condemned to solitude. It would survive. It would adapt. It would find a way to the surface, to the light, to the world that had rejected its kind. And it would remember the woman who had sent its family away, remember the humans who had hunted them, remember the sorrow. The cycle would continue. The darkness would return. The weeping would begin again. Elena Morrison walked on, unaware of the creature behind her, unaware that her victory was temporary, that the peace she had bought would not last. The Squonk would return, the sorrow would spread, and the forest would weep once more. Because some darkness never lifts, some sorrow never ends, and some creatures are born to weep and to make others weep with them. The cycle continued, the darkness waited, and the Squonk, patient and eternal, prepared to rise again. It had all the time in the world. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe, so you don't miss the stories yet to come.